respective firms and what part you play in the plan. The public, I think, is really interested to know, just so the public knows generally, that this has been on the books for many years now, and we thank the Battery Park City Authority for engaging us, quite fairly during this time. The community board has written 4 resolutions on the South Battery Park City resiliency plans, most of which were not necessarily in full support of what you'll see tonight, to be honest. I think people had a question right from the beginning as to why this was necessary to basically demolish the existing park and pavilion. But slowly, I think some folks have begun to understand that. But nonetheless, there are still many questions that were raised in these 4 resolutions that we look forward to hearing whatever responses you can still provide for us tonight on some specific questions we had. So every one of these presentations is available on the Battery Park City site, which is excellent. Everything is there. And Community Board 1's recordings are also, of course, available on YouTube. So there's plenty of information available. Okay, so without further ado, I think, are we set to go now, everybody?
We're all set and we have a quorum.
Excellent. Okay, so take it away. I think it's Hogan Edelberg. Is that correct?
Great. That's correct. Thank you, Alice. And thank you for the great introduction. I'll go ahead and share my screen. And hopefully what you should be able to see is the PDF for tonight. Just a quick question. Are you seeing this full screen or do you see the tools around it? Otherwise I'm at...
We do see the tools.
Okay, I'll do my full screen and then you'll see.
Okay.
See that.
And just Hogan, just say who AECOM is and what they're doing, just for folks who may not remember. Just a
of course. Yeah. So my name is Hogan Edelberg. I'm a landscape architect with the Landscape Architecture and Urban Design Studio of AECOM here in New York. AECOM is the lead designer for landscape architecture and engineering of the South Battery Park City Resiliency Project. And we've had the pleasure to be, as you mentioned, pretty engaged with CB1 over the last number of months with this project, and it presented a number of updates. So I'm joined today by the team members you mentioned, including Gabriel from Thomas Pfeiffer and Associates, who will be kind of picking up where I leave off in the presentation tonight. So tonight we're going to go over four items to share. One, and the item that I'll be speaking to, is the flood wall update. After that, we have an update on the pavilion, including pavilion design studies and accessibility, as well as a sustainability update this evening. And we're very excited to come back and be able to share these. There's 2 concepts we're going to share with the community board tonight for particularly the exposed flood wall that is going to be instated running from the Battery through Imperial Plaza and into Wagner Park. And we wanted to start tonight by sharing what was shown during our preliminary PDC submission, and it's really the design, the concept, what's driving these design studies. This is a large element that runs from the Battery all the way to Wagner Park. You can see in this conceptual elevation on the top of the screen. Just a quick note, this diagram is not to scale. We're just using it as a way to illustrate sort of the original concept of how we are integrating this wall into the story of the Battery and the story of Imperial Plaza. The original concept is to take rougher and more textural and more kind of building block forms on the Battery side and weave that into a transition that expresses the change in place as you go from the Battery in the south to Wagner Park in the north. And you can see in the image below how that starts to be expressed in a range of textures and colors and stone types to create something which is very interactive and helps to humanize this piece of flood infrastructure. So looking at this area in plan, the flood wall is really an element that can serve to connect these three spaces, the Battery, Imperial Plaza, and Wagner Park. And as a design driver, this has been something that the team has been focused on for quite some time. In plan overlaid with our current site plan, the flood wall is shown in blue. Areas where you see a dashed line, it is either buried or will be flush with the ground plane, as is in the case in Imperial Plaza, where we have flip gates. But we're showing this again today to illustrate that it really is something that runs through every site in the southern part of the project. And the way that we can achieve this unification through the design of this is by looking at the cladding of the flood wall, which is what is going to be exposed in the darker blue. So I'm sure some of you have seen this before, but we have been looking at a palette of stone to clad the flood wall in that relates both to the warm and saturated colors that exist in the Stony Creek stone in the Battery today, but also relate and are able to create a transition to the pearl gray, which will be used in Wagner Park in the proposed design. And we have some descriptions here of some of the qualities of these stones that we really are picking up on. The Stony Creek, which is prevalent in the Battery today, has this strong pink-based color and a mixture of these black and gray speckles. It's used very widely in the Battery. A new stone that we're considering as part of these two new concepts, which I'll share today for the cladding of the flood wall, is St. Sebastian, which is a granite that picks up both on the warm colors of the Stony Creek, but also starts to relate to the lighter and cooler tones that you see in the Stansted gray and the pearl gray as you travel north. And so what this does is it really kind of gives us a palette going from warmer to cooler, from kind of heavier to lighter, that we can use to articulate this piece of flood infrastructure and create the transition. And what I'll share in a second is a couple of different ways we can achieve that. So the original inspiration for the cladding of this flood wall is really looking at the legacy of stacked stone walls in the Battery. We have this photo of Castle Clinton here, which really illustrates how organic that can feel and how structured, yet also kind of a little bit looser that starts to look. Combining that with the idea of the water in the Hudson River and really playing off of its movement and its light. And how that may be applied to the wall is to moving from left in the Battery to right in Wagner Park. You start to overlay this kind of granular texture of the stacked stone walls and that roughness and color, and pull that over as a transition to Imperial Plaza, and where you start to pick up a little bit more on the more linear elements of movement and light that you can start to get in water. And so what we're talking about here is looking at a transition from the Stony Creek and the St. Sebastian on the left to the pearl gray on the right. And the Stony Creek and St. Sebastian becomes our stacked stone, and the pearl gray becomes our Hudson River. And overlaid on the elevation below is kind of a rough approximation of how that might be applied to the wall, going from really rougher textures, split stone, and sand propane flamed, to smoother textures in the pearl gray, but starts to bring out a little bit more of that quartzite and starts to play a little bit more off the light that's going to reflect off the wall. So before going into each section in detail, I'd like to show you overall elevation of what this will look like as if you were standing along Battery Place and looking towards the water. On the left, we have the Battery berm, and don't worry because I'll zoom in and go through this in much more detail. I have the Battery berm on the left, which you can see is going to be concealed behind these street trees. We have the Stony Creek granite in the foreground. The battery, the wall, just where my mouse is now, actually comes into the foreground as it emerges from the battery berm, where we have the entrance more or less aligned with the memorial in the background here. Then moving to the north, we have our largest section of exposed wall. This is directly over the battery underpass, where we have a slope up to the raised Imperial Plaza, where we have new tree planting and our low walls in the foreground, creating a continuous security barrier to protect against any vehicular threats. Moving past that, we have the entrance to Imperial Plaza, which is sort of flanked by these side security walls, and then moving into Wagner Park on the very right. So this, in this drawing, you can see how all of this starts to look to scale and in context with each other, and how that flood wall really does create continuity across these different spaces. One thing which I'll go into more detail in just a few slides are the raised columns in Imperial Plaza, which are the vertical elements which serve to continue that design language across to Wagner Park. So zooming in a little bit more detail onto the battery entrance. I mentioned in the previous slide that the battery wall on the left, it actually kind of comes towards you in the foreground, and you can see that on the plan on the upper right. Just a note, this is actually reversed from what we're seeing in elevation. So the plan on the right is the elevation on the left. And here in this first concept, what we're really seeing is this transition from the rougher split-faced stacked stone that speaks to the vernacular of the battery, and how that can start to transition across, moving from more rectilinear veneer pieces, which are derived from the proportions of the existing stony creek blocks at on site today, to more linear and fluid pieces of veneer cladding as we transition across the flood wall that goes from the battery into Pier A. And another small note is we've, in an effort to kind of minimize the opening, working with the Battery Conservancy and Parks, we've adjusted the entrance dimension from 45 feet in our preliminary PDC package to 30 feet, as you can see here. That does make this wall a total of 90 feet in length. So overlaid here are the stone types that I mentioned before, and a rough key plan of how that transition can start to occur. We're still working on refining exactly how this cladding would be applied, but the overall concept is really making sure that this idea of land and water, of kind of roughness and movement, is expressed across this flood wall. So on the left, that might be done using a split face stone. And on the right, it would be done using CNC routed stone veneer that we can use to achieve kind of this rippled pattern and really accentuate the idea of movement as you move into Imperial Plaza. Zooming in even further, you can just see a little bit more detail about how that jointing will occur. And it really does speak quite a bit to the kind of legacy of stacked stone in the battery. And you even in the left-hand portion of this elevation can see how we get a nice play of different stone types to really kind of humanize this, make it warm, and create visual interest as you travel along it in the battery bikeway. So moving from Stony Creek to St. Sebastian to Pearl Gray, it gives you a really dynamic and ever-changing kind of relationship between these vertical elements. Moving over to the right, again, this is directly over the battery underpass, which is driving the need for this exposed flood wall. That stacked stone and the idea of earth can fade away at some point, and we pick up much more strongly on the idea of movement and water, using Pearl Gray, which really does reflect a lot of the light when it's sandblasted and treated with smoother finishes, and lengthening the cladding to move from the more proportional blocks on the left to more linear elements on the right. What that could start to look like in perspective is shown here. So the goal is to create an interplay of different stone textures and stone types to start to break this element down. Again, these are being used as wayfinding features as well. So we have entrance signage for the Battery and Pier A and also Wagner Park in the background. On the left, just to point out, is the Stony Creek granite blocks, which are going to be reinstated. And the Battery Bikeway wrapping around the berm, which is encasing the flood wall here. And the preferred direction is to use operable bollards in this location to provide that site security connection, but also allow for freedom of movement by pedestrians and by bicycles. And stepping back a little bit to look at what this looks like from the bike lane just a little bit farther to the north. In the foreground, we have our site security wall. And then in the background, the exposed flood wall. And you can pick up on how this transition from the stacked stone to water kind of expresses itself over the length of this feature. And into the raised plaza on the right, which is at elevation 11, compared to where we're standing, which is more or less at street level. So that was one concept for how to achieve this idea of transition and speak to the kind of heritage of the Battery. But we have another idea, which is actually really exciting to introduce today, which speaks to the importance of the location of the Battery, not just for the island of Manhattan, but for New York as a whole, and specifically kind of looking at the Hudson River Valley. We wanted to recognize the very strategic importance of the Battery and its location where the Hudson River really becomes a New York harbor. And so reflecting its relationship with the Hudson River Valley and also its relationship with water, we can start to imagine that this idea of topography in a map can actually be transcribed on the wall itself to create an idea of kind of a narrative story and place-based storytelling that can occur as you are, are viewing this wall or coming to visit the Battery or traveling along, on a bicycle on the bikeway. So what we've done in this concept is actually take the topography of the Hudson River Valley and assign different sequences to that, and assign stone types to these different elevations. So we have warmer stones reflecting our higher elevations, down to lighter stones, which reflect our lower elevations and also our water. In addition to kind of telling this really interesting story about the Battery and Manhattan and the Hudson River Valley, it can also still achieve this idea of transition from rougher and warmer textures in the Battery to lighter and smoother textures in Wagner Park. So what does that start to look like in reality? We zoom in a little bit farther as well here too, but what that does is it makes the Battery wall as it is exposed from the Battery berm tell the story of the Hudson River Valley. And as you cross the Battery entrance and is transcribed on the Battery Pier A wall, we have the island of Manhattan located right here, and then the water flowing out into the New York harbor from this valley on the remainder of the wall. And again, this is an idea of transition, and exactly where this happens on the wall can be adjusted. But it really strengthens that relationship to the Stony Creek granite blocks that are out there today by extending kind of the horizontal idea of land across this wall, and is in a way helping to helping to reflect the sort of changing relationship of the Battery with water, and especially it's kind of salient because of the function of this wall at the end of the day. So that would change our kind of finish strategy a little bit, where we kind of play up this idea of land as layers. and use either CNC routed or water jet stone in a veneer pattern to apply this idea of topography to the wall on the left. And moving over to the right, we still use extrusions to express the ripples, where we have the water flowing out of the Hudson River Valley. But we can explore kind of how to accentuate that texture and make this as dynamic as possible. And again, on the bottom, we have a key plan showing how that might be expressed on the wall itself. You can see very clearly how the Hudson River extends all the way through this. So zooming in a little bit more, just how does this stack up against the scale of the Stony Creek blocks and the scale of the battery berm itself? This is a 63-foot section of the wall, which is going to, again, it's going to be coming towards you as it emerges from the battery berm. And you really do get something that can be interesting as you move along it, interesting as you look at it from across the street, but also interesting as you walk up to it. And it can start to tell a story of the place that you're visiting, and also the function of this wall itself. This idea of the transition from land to water can be kind of a helpful element to interpret the battery and also this flood wall. And what does that start to look like in perspective? It's something like this, where the gradient of warmer to cooler, it still happens from south to north, but it also starts to happen from top to bottom and vice versa, where the idea of the Hudson River Valley extends all the way across the wall, even as it sort of snakes into the background and dives into the battery berm. And stepping back a little bit, the kind of tactile nature of this becomes even more apparent. And the warmth that comes from reflecting this idea of topography and land with Stony Creek or St. Sebastian is something that really catches your eye as you stand back and becomes something of a wayfinding element, and kind of a marker in place that helps define the entrance to the battery. Moving along a little bit just to show a couple more of these features in Imperial Plaza. This is a zoom in of the elevation looking at Imperial Plaza itself. You can see in the building in the background and the low security walls in the foreground. I'm going to talk a little bit about these columns, which are at the plaza level, where my mouse is right now. So you've seen some ideas for these columns before. We took a pass at these again just to ensure that the way these are being detailed achieves a couple of different things. One is that it really relates to this idea of movement and of water as we've expressed it in the kind of major pieces of the flood wall to the south. So we've articulated the horizontal jointing of these to create something that is a little bit more playful. Not just in one dimension, but as you rotate around it on all four sides, this starts to create an interplay of the different stone types and the different joint locations to kind of give a sense of continuous movement. And this is seen kind of in the key plans below, how that wouldn't just serve to articulate a single column, but it also helps to highlight how the different amounts of stone are applied in different ways to the three columns as you move across Imperial Plaza. And in this case, it's looking at a couple of different finishes of our sort of water, which is our pearl gray. Okay, so that's the update that we have to share today to the flood wall cladding. Two interesting concepts, we hope.
Thanks. Do you want to move right through? Does the committee want to respond to those particular features, or should we maybe look at the whole, I guess, and then ask questions? I think I've answered my own question here. So go ahead with the presentation. I think we should get the full concept.
Great. Thank you,
Thank
Alice.
you.
Great. So Alice, Jenny Dudgeon here from the Federal Park City Authority Project Manager. I just want to also comment for the flood wall presentation that Hogan just gave. The design update from that, we saw two concepts. We are submitting a singular concept, which is in the process of being coordinated still with the Pipes Department and also the Battery Conservancy. So working through that with them, and on April 30th, we'll be submitting the updated PDC submission. We had shared some of the prior design updates with CB1 back in February. This was one of the open design items that's included in that. Everything else that you'll see further on in this presentation is not part of the PDC submission.
I'm sorry, I wasn't sure I caught that. So what we've just seen is part of the PDC presentation in 2 weeks, but what's coming now is not.
Correct, correct.
And when will the Wagner Park part of the presentation be presented to PDC?
Well, Wagner Park is in Battery Park City Authority, Battery Park City, and is state land, so it's not subject to PDC submission.
Right. I assume, well, okay, but none of it is. That was
No.
always never clear. Okay, that's helpful to clarify. Okay, so good, thank you. Okay.
No worries.
So,
as mentioned, you just saw two concepts, and that will be refined to one of those two concepts in collaboration with Parks and the Conservancy.
oh, I see what you're saying. Okay.
And is the point on that just saying you're showing it to us, but other people will decide? Is that the, in terms of you haven't just, the battery and, I mean, can we weigh in on which one we like better, or it's it's not going to matter?
I mean, obviously, you're very free to weigh in on that. At this stage, we're also obviously in collaboration with City Parks and the Conservancy in regards to total preferences.
Well, I don't want to, yeah, by the way, that was Wendy Chapman, our co-chair of this committee. Thanks, Wendy. Good question. I'm very hopeful that Wari Price, who I see is online, and who's the head of the Battery Conservancy, will stick with us till the end to add, just to kind of give us your perspective, Wari, if that's okay, on all of this. So, okay. Because I know we had heard from Wari Price and the Conservancy on this area, and it's important that we wanted to make sure it's addressed according to what we had spoken about at other meetings, including the Parks Committee. Okay, so moving on to the Wagner Park Pavilion building update. I see up here. Okay, thank you.
Hi, I'm Gabriel Smith from Thomas Pfeiffer and Partners, the director for the Pavilion project, working with AECOM since the beginning of the project. We're going to give you a couple of things tonight to try to both bring you up to speed on where we are with the building, but also to address some of the discussion that happened in February when we presented last time. So specifically about accessibility and elevator. So hopefully this will be helpful and productive. Next slide. Hogan, are you driving?
Yeah, can you see this, everybody? Advance to the next one.
Oh, sorry.
Yes.
I must be lagging behind a little bit. So in what we're going to show you on the Pavilion side is essentially a lot of technical development that's happened since the last time we presented the Pavilion to you. But these renderings that we're showing are renderings from the January 2020 submission. But it's really to put the point on that nothing in terms of the plan or the footprint of the building has changed since then. So Hogan, if you could advance to the first floor plan comparison. So on the floor plans, you'll see that in general, again, everything is generally where it was in the past presentations. On the ground level battery place, you can see that the entrance is basically in the same configuration it was. We have two elevators, one for the restaurant side and one for the Pavilion community side. Okay, next slide. So at the park level, again, you can see we have the same two elevators coming up and serving the community and park side and the restaurant side. These configurations really haven't changed much at all since the beginning of 75% CDs. Okay, next. The mezzanine level, again, not much has changed there. We have really refined with the technical team how duct routing is working and things like that. Okay, next to the roof. So you can see the roof is largely, again, unchanged from where it was in the past. That is...
I'm sorry, Gabriel, to interrupt you. Forgive me. Would you be able to, I think a lot of folks who weren't here to see the original presentation in February would really benefit, and even those of us who were, with a little more fleshing out of what exactly is going on in each of these areas, and maybe a little bit more time on each slide, because it's a lot to take in.
Yeah,
just a little more
sure.
description of what we're looking at the north roof deck and the south, and if you could incorporate the sustainable resiliency part of it. I assume that's part of this. Thanks.
Yeah, so A10 has joined us tonight to actually bring us up to speed on the kind of nuances of sustainable design. But I will tell you that on the roof, we've really maximized the use of renewables in combination with public open spaces. And so what we've tried to do is to provide for as much pervious surface there as possible with planters around the perimeter of the roof. We've got solar thermal, which is essentially a hot water generating piece, is also combined with some the possibility of PVs, which you know what those are, solar panels. So really the detailing of this and the kind of refinement has to do largely with energy generation in conjunction with the mechanical team and with A10, trying to kind of push the resiliency components of this. In addition to that, obviously, we have a high performance building envelope, which we'll talk about, and we have triple glazing and things like that. So the building at this point, in terms of sustainability, is really really elevated quite a bit from where it was at the prior time we talked about it. So it's not the morphological changes really as much as it is the kind of details and the conditions that you're seeing in the development of the project. Does that kind of answer your question?
Well, I think we'll see the whole presentation, and that might help us.
Oh, sure.
Just more detail and a little bit more time on really looking at moving through the space. Maybe if you could go back to the ground floor or forward, wherever it might be, and just move us through the architecture of the space from the site plan up through to the roof. That would be helpful, I think.
Okay.
And Alice, I think you're asking for just a recap of the programming as well on each floor, correct?
Yes,
yeah.
and we're starting at the street and where you would enter, and how that relates to right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Sure. So yeah, Hogan, if you could just step back to the plan slides. I'm actually unfortunately having some connectivity issues here, so you're gonna have to bear with me as I kind of fly this plane without much visual. So if you go back down to the Battery Place entrance, you can see off to the right there the entrance for the park's garage for the electric vehicles, and also the park storage components, which are kind of off to the left side of the plan. And then to the south, bottom of the plan, is where the kitchen is, and that has direct access up to the restaurant space. And so those really have direct service to the above program. So the community storage room that was in blue before is now just white and is part of the whole thing. That is actually where storage of resources for education, for the kind of various activities that take place in the park for on a daily basis. And that there's direct, as I said, there's direct access via elevator so that they can move carts in and out and up and down. Okay, next. So
Wait 1 second. Can you go back to that? I'm sorry. Can you
sure.
I really wanted to understand this, and I'm so delighted you're here to explain it. So from
Sure.
Battery Place, which is the street.
Yeah.
We are continuing not to have any way from the street into the building directly,
No, but we did some,
unless you're
yeah,
parking your car or getting trash. So the
Yes.
street is still the back of the building, and there's no way if you're to get an elevator into the building at that point.
yeah. We
Is that still true?
actually did some studies for you tonight, which I'll show you when we go through these, which examine how to possibly put an elevator in or use one of the elevators that we currently have in the building. So at the moment,
A quick question. And there's no way to walk into the building? No stairs, no nothing to walk in, even without an elevator?
yeah. So the history of the project, which I'll also show in this other section on accessibility, we originally had a set of stairs that walked you up into the park. Those, at the meeting that we had, the community meeting, the public meeting, there was a criticism that was levied against the design, which was that it wasn't universally accessible. And that we decided that there was an elevator that got you from the street level up to the park level in that scheme. What happened since then was that in responding to that, and in engaging with Battery Park City Authority on various things, including horticulture and the health of the trees in the LA and the master planning and the origins of the project, the team arrived at a solution that would ramp the entrances from the park, the entrances from Battery Place up to the pavilion. So the plan that you're looking at right now is actually a strictly service plan, and that is not really fundamentally in the park space. It is on Battery Place, but the entire park surface has been elevated by a ramp, and we'll show you that in a minute. So I'd like to go to the next.
And Alice, just to reiterate, and I think Gabe, you stated this, you know, all the programming on the street level is private. So we have the back of house for the Battery Park City operations team, and then we have the back of house for the restaurant vendor. There's no public access at street level.
That's right.
And what's across the street at that point? Across,
It's the Wagner Hotel.
so the Wagner Hotel is just looking at a wall, yeah, in the back of all these buildings?
It's
No,
not, and Gabe will show you the elevation. So we've definitely treated, we recognize that, you know, there was concerns previously raised about this being a service entrance. And we've taken that very seriously to make sure it doesn't feel or read like a service entrance. But rather this is part of a landscape berm. Gabe will I think go back and revisit some elevations we presented back in April, in February, where we looked at the development of that entrance and also the development of the berm, which is really part of that sort of landscaped elevation along Battery Place. But handing it back to you, Gabe.
Sure. Just kind of on that topic, we did at one point early in the project we had a vaulted service entrance there that we had discussions with CD1 about how that felt like it drove people to the service entrance and might be confusing. And so in the last presentation, we actually showed a revised version of that. The berm that surrounds it, which is really the dominant element here, is composed of a stone wall with heavy planting, and Hogan and his team have done an incredible job of actually making the colors of plants and things like that drive you to the entrances at the bottom of the ramp. So we'll show you some of that. I would say that it's a very elegantly understated solution in terms of what you see at the service entrance piece. It is not confusing at all about what's happening there. So, you know, we will show you the elevations in this other set of slides. At this park level, what happens is that you've got the access to the roof by stairs, and you've got access to the rooftops by elevators. And this has not changed since before. So you can see on the left side, there's a public elevator that gets you to the rooftop. And then there's a service elevator over to the top of the plan that's really for the parks service folks who need to get up and down from the basement level, the lower level, up into this park level. And then what
Do you
you
have the
have,
ability to use a pointer in this presentation? It might help. I don't know if that's possible, where you can move people through, or, yeah, there you
Or
go.
a
If you,
mouse or something.
sure,
that's good, the little hand or whatever you've got, just to
okay.
sort of show what you're talking.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'll try and keep up with you, Gabe, and if, you know, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so the on the plan in the left, the pink is obviously the restaurant component of it, and the community room is indicated there in yellow. We have public restrooms that are immediately behind each of those pieces of program. And then, as I said, we have access up to the roof via stairs. So really the parks or the community education component of this is served by a 1,247 square foot space. The restaurant is 1,208 square feet. I can't remember the exact table count, but we went back and forth on that. The building itself, one of the things that's happened through the years is that the footprint is actually smaller in square footage than the existing building, but the program area, because we're using these multiple levels, is actually significantly higher. So at the park level, we're really trying to accommodate a lot of different things. We want to preserve the idea of this building being a gateway and respecting the kind of Olin master plan from the inception of the park project, preserving the views of the Statue of Liberty as these two pieces kind of part and frame views of the water. And so there were a whole series of design guidelines that we developed about pushing the building as far back away from water's edge in order to increase the amount of protected area, but also a kind of a building that is really a kind of gateway to the park. Okay. Any questions about this level?
I think we'll just maybe save the questions for the end, but
Okay.
thanks.
So the next level is the mezzanine level, which is really a service only level. So it's got mechanical space and elevator machine rooms. And the important point to make about the mezzanine level is that it's elevating this equipment that's, you know, expensive and really needs to be self-sustaining. It's elevating it up out of the flood level significantly. So we're not putting that equipment in a vulnerable place below the parks program where you might find it in another building. Until the alignment is completed, the building needs to be flood proofed, which we've done with some temporary removable stop logs on the service entry side in case there's a flood. But we decided to not both take valuable service space that needs direct access after battery place, and also to protect that equipment to put it up on the mezzanine. Okay. So moving to the roof. So I think we covered a lot of the features here. Again, this is the place where we have kind of these renewables. The elevator overrides come up and allow public to move in and out of the building for like events. There's obviously two stairs here that serve primarily for egress, but also they're gracious enough to serve for getting up and down as well. Any questions about the roof?
Could you just describe what the renewables are, and what are they doing for the building? How much of what is this? Could you just give us a little more?
I think I need to let A10 weigh in on that more specifically, but what they are doing is trying to offset one of the big energy consumers, which is hot water for the restaurant. Obviously, we're working closely with Battery Park City Authority on the tenant guidelines for that operation. But one of the big things that we found is challenging is just the amount of hot water that's being generated for their operations as we project out with our food service consultant. But in terms of the things that you really will see up here that are important visually, it's green roof where you see the green on the left side. That's been replaced with this kind of gray hatching that's underneath these solar panels. There is a roof walkway that connects the two sides with south and north roof decks that are available for sweeping views out over the river and the the surrounding areas toward the Statue of Liberty. So obviously that's a super important thing. And the last thing is there are planters that we're working to incorporate and get even more green on the roof.
Gabe, I'm not sure if you're able to see, but I advanced to the site section, or the section to the community room and through the restaurant.
Okay, yeah, so this is here just to kind of show the technical development. We are, obviously at 95% CDs, getting detail out a lot of the components of the building. Ryan, are you able to see the screen?
Yes, Gabe, I can see the screen.
Okay, so why don't you just talk a little bit about this, if you don't mind.
Sure. So you can see in the building section that on the left-hand side, which is to the north, is the community room. And to the right-hand side is the restaurant. So there's these two public double height spaces that are facing towards the middle kind of public space between the two halves of the pavilion. On the left-hand side in the basement, you can see there's the park's storage area and also the water reuse room and some of the other mechanical spaces. And on the right-hand side in the basement, there's the kitchen that serves the restaurant. On the ground floor, there's also public restrooms that serve the park. And then above that, there's a mezzanine space, which has the mechanical equipment that serves the building. On the roof, there's the publicly accessible terrace that provides views, out to the harbor, and also the green roof areas that have the renewables, solar thermal photovoltaic panels. So you can go to the next slide. I think Gabe got the slide here on the construction details.
Yeah,
Technical
one of the
development.
developments, go ahead, Ryan, start it off.
Oh. Yeah, I think one of the developments that Gabe's going to mention is this use of a double wall system that allows us to have a continuous thermal envelope to help mitigate any potential thermal bridging and to create a continuous, tight seal to the exterior. We're using this thermal mass system, which allows you to pour, an outer concrete wall with the insulation and vapor barrier, and then an inner structural concrete wall.
So one of the things I think is exciting about this is the way in which it really elevates the ability for this building to be long-term high performance and have a life cycle that's maybe much longer than the normal building. So, I think unfortunately one of the things that we discovered when we did a survey of the existing building is that it's really suffered out on the, with the marine environment that it's in. And so what this thermal mass system does, and it's kind of a product that's very unique, it actually encapsulates the insulation And so you can see in the pink how we've got a continuous thermal envelope here that's running around the building. And then on both the outside and the inside, where we don't need an additional finish, we've been able to eliminate a lot of the framing and the kind of the thin drywall finishes that you would get in a lot of buildings. And so you know, it's kind of a great complement to the triple glazing that we already have on the building and the kind of high level of insulation that's in on the roof package as well. Okay. I see on my screen that we've moved to the next topic. Is that correct?
Gabe, I switched back to the details slide because I heard you were still talking to it, but we can.
Yeah, if you don't mind advancing and just letting me know where you are, I can kind of pick it up from there.
Okay.
So just before you move on, and just sort of a couple of quick things, just to make sure it's clear. There was a reference to a basement. There is no basement on the project. I believe, Ryan, you were referring to the street level. So because we've essentially raised up the park, you know, and sort of slid the building underneath it, like that's actually our street level. So our public level and is the lawn level. So just in terms of some of the terminology, so ground is actually lawn level, which is the public level, and then the street level is the back house level. Gabe also made reference to the deployable floodproofing at the entrance, and that's not protecting against these big storm events, which is what the primary flood wall is doing. It's more of a sort of a tertiary level protective measure against any, say, sheet water flow on the streets. And certainly our coastal modeling has shown that we're not going to be experiencing that in and around Battery Place, but we have a protective backup measure in preparation for these very, very large storm events, just to make sure that we're protecting the entrance to the back of house areas at street level. Thanks, Gabe.
Sure. Okay, so if Hogan, if you don't mind advancing to the site plan that's part of this accessibility discussion.
Sure.
So this is a kind of composite of where we were in January and before, and really talks. This package is going to do two things. One is it's going to speak to how we got to where we are in terms of accessibility on the project, and also as I mentioned, we're going to look at a couple of options for adding an elevator at the Battery Place side. So this first slide is just kind of a reminder of where we have been on the project with regards to all of the drivers for the position of the building and for what it's supposed to do as part of the ensemble of the whole park. So obviously maximizing the protected, recreational area is important. Organizing the site around this lawn and central axis with these incredible views, which you have now, and we absolutely want to preserve that legacy from the original design. Aligning the building with the approach to the park and these alleys kind of being elevated is all part of both weaving the legacy of the project and also kind of trying to get as close to the spirit of universal access as we can possibly get. And so that's really what we've been doing the whole time with the building in its different iterations. Okay, next. So kind of taking a step back, look at the kind of one of the earliest designs here. This was a public presentation that really was, for us, it was kind of a watershed moment because it kind of really unlocked our responsibility to try to deal with universal access. And so in this scheme, what we had was we had a grand stair that went from Battery Place up into the park, where you then got these great views to the to the river. This had an elevator, as you can see, that went on each alley and served the park level. So one was for the restaurant and one was really a public elevator that got you up so that you could circumvent the stairs in the event that you needed. And one of the important feedbacks we got in that meeting was, hey, this isn't really universally accessible. It's, you know, it sort of relegates people who are in a wheelchair or who are mobility impaired to use these elevators. So specifically, there was discussion about a ramp, and also there was a lot of discussion about the current stock of elevators and how maintenance has been difficult. And so, you know, we took that away, and you can go to the next slide. What this slide shows is just what was happening at the ground level. But what this was it everything on the Battery Place side of, and maybe Hogan, you can point to that. Everything on the Battery Place side was at the current sidewalk level, and you took these big stairs up into the park, and the elevator served as a form of universal access. So just heading to the next slide. Well, back up one second. There's the program down here is, there were some toilets, there was the kitchen, public restrooms were there, security office, storage program. So it's essentially what we currently have in our program. It's been refined over the time, over the many months. Okay, next. So this slide is a slide that shows one of the iterations of how to possibly address the issue of accessibility. And at one point in the design, we actually had 3 elevators. You can see them here. One is along Battery Place, and you know, we also were asked to consider ramping as an option from Battery Place up at the center of the building. And what happens there is that you switch back, and Hogan's team created these studies. There's another component to this, which was a study for some additional stairs. So all of this is to say that we've gone through a lot of different iterations. The important thing is that at this time, we did arrive at a ramped set of allées. The majority of the toilets in this case were in the lower level of the building. So if you were at an event, you might have to go downstairs to get to them. So it really necessitated some ready access there by way of elevator. Back of house spaces, as I said, were at the Battery Place level. And as we started to study the elevator itself and what happens with it operationally, the feedback we got was there was a lot of concern about being isolated in an elevator lobby that's kind of concealed from the sidewalk. There were concerns about the cost of 3 elevators in this. And the other discussion that we had was about the massiveness of the presence of these elevators along the Battery Place side of this building. So, you know, I think it's kind of important to show all these studies before we move on to the next. Sounds like we've got an open microphone somewhere.
Would you be good enough just to go back to the public meeting 3 slide on this? I just want to take a look at. Were those allées at that point, the new allées, ramping up or not? I can't quite make it out.
If you're talking about June 24th, where we had stairs.
Conceptual design, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's just the stairs, and these were still.
That's right. At this time, we thought the allées, you know, there was lots of discussion with lots of different people, but the decision was to do whatever we could to preserve the allées and to keep them at this level. So at that time, we were trying everything we could to kind of balance out this accessibility question. We actually did a lot of studies in our office with ramps and spiraling ramps and, you know, all sorts of things to get this ramping to happen. And then over the course of several months and in lots of discussion with lots of folks at Battery Park City Authority, you know, we arrived at the decision to try to make this thing truly universally accessible. And so that led to the ramping of the entire LAs.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. So I think if you could go to the current plan, I'll try to talk through the design update of January 15th, 2020, and some important things that happened once that berm got, once the ramps got sloped along the berm. So at this point in the design, all the toilets and the public spaces were relocated to the lawn level. And then the back of house spaces were all at the Battery Place level. We eliminated the isolated elevator lobby, which was at Battery Place, so there weren't any blind conditions down there that might be dangerous. We reviewed the universal access with the mayor's office for people with disabilities, and they determined that the ramping was in fact a good solution, providing universal access, and that the third elevator wasn't needed at that time. It's important for us to say that, you know, when you read through the ADA, it's not just what they're saying you can do, it's also what they're saying you must do. And in the case of ADAG, what they're saying is that universally accessible routes have to be connected with the kind of more common path of travel. I mean, to make it truly universal, it's not just good enough to throw an elevator at this and say, you know, anybody who doesn't want to or can't move up and down these ramps has to, or stairs, has to go in and use an elevator. So for us, it was really kind of a fundamental combination of understanding equivalent facilitation and what that really means in its spirit, and also understanding the requirements of accessible routes. So they have to coincide with general circulation paths, and they have to connect site entrances with building entrances. So in this case, the important thing is that the site entrances are really at the bottoms of these ramps. And you can, of course, you can do more than that. You can certainly put an elevator in wherever you want. But for us, meeting both the letter of the law and the spirit and intention of this was important. And so that really, for us, convinced us that this, you know, elevating the entire park is really, you know, kind of where this change came, and the ramps, you know, elevated with that.
Can you provide any precedence for that sort of situation of a 150-foot long ramp without any elevator access to a public park or building? I'm just curious.
You know, I'd be happy to look into that. I think 150 feet is, I think the question is how long it might take somebody to walk that distance. Maybe it's not the math is a different kind of equation. Maybe you know, if that's the question.
I mean, it's really been, it's mind-boggling to me, and I can see it's a tremendous struggle and challenge, and continues to be. And I personally don't think it's resolved, but that's neither here nor there. But I just am curious, and I had shared with the community, you know, the committee rather, that my own understanding of that space was very much brought. I mean, what this could be was brought to the fore when I think of my father, now deceased, who could not have come here, and so that anymore. You know, there's no way that an elderly person could necessarily spend that much time ascending to this beautiful view and all. So that always gives me pause, and that there's no alternative for someone like that is a problem to me. So it's and you know, in the pouring rain, or children, you know, who may get tired and all that. So you know,
I have 3 kids. I know exactly what you're talking about. Strollers.
Okay.
So So what we did in sort of response to that was we actually studied a couple of different options. And so Hogan, I'm going to trouble you to go to the plan, because I believe the lower level plan of this really is just kind of a description of what I've already gone through. But I'd like for you to go to the plan where we've overlaid two possible ways to access the existing elevators.
This is Gwen Dawson. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that, you know, as we've said before, our team has designed according to the ADA and all regulatory requirements for accessibility, and have come to a solution to a number of different conflicting sets of conditions and issues that do meet all requirements and provide a beautiful access point that's fully accessible at both ends of the park. And what they're about to show you now is not in the way of current options. It's to show what the obstacles are and the conflicts are, and why the authority, with the certainly the aid of our design team, have come to the conclusions regarding the design and the accessibility measures for the design. So I'll let them go through this with you.
So thank you. Thank you.
Can I just ask a quick question? So when you're basically saying there's no real options here, is how you see it. You're presenting whatever options there are, but to comply with the ADA, you have to do what you're doing. Is that what your point is?
I'm saying that we have gone through a wide variety of possible options and combinations of options, and what we're trying to share with you in a way that maybe is more detailed and more understandable tonight is really how we've arrived at those conclusions. We still are at the point where we believe that the design that the design team has come up with is the very best design option that addresses matters of accessibility. But we wanted you to see those conflicts and to walk through those with you, so that it doesn't come across as we've just decided to do this without consideration of some of the things that you've brought up and some of the concerns that you've expressed. So we don't think that this has changed our minds about what the right solution is, but we want you to see it, and we want you to be able to respond to it.
Sorry, I interrupted.
So Hogan, if you can go to the slide where we show the current building plan with two options, one in blue and one in green.
Yeah, I think I have that up now, Gabe, titled Elevator
ready to go.
Feasibility Study.
Great, thank you. So here, what we did was in an effort to just study, again, not that we are proposing that this is the solution, but to study what it would take to use one of the two elevators that currently do move up and down the building without adding a third elevator, as we had shown in the prior schemes. And so in this drawing, you can see the green band that goes to the existing Parks elevator to the north. That would be a new public hallway that would be cut through the core of the plan and would provide you with a kind of lobby space at the Parks elevator. And that could go and get you up to the upper levels, including the roof. The blue line shows how the existing restaurant and currently public elevator, the elevator that is used all the time for the public, how that would be potentially accessed. And, you know, in studying these, we had to sort of list some considerations about them. One of the things you could say is that you provide access to the existing elevators, which is good because you don't have to add one. One of the difficulties is you're talking about a 70+ foot long corridor from Battery Place into one of these elevators. In terms of wayfinding, it adds a little bit of a challenge since we've worked really hard to kind of make the service entrance quiet down and be this kind of very understated entry. So you'd have to kind of work through not only getting people to that location and signing it and doing all that, but also you'd have to actually get people in safely through these long corridors with signage and lighting and things like that. So what also happens is that there are some operational safety and security concerns. You know, somebody needs to make sure that the elevators are shut down, the hallways are secured, and that nobody's in there. It also creates a few challenges in terms of programmatic reductions in terms of efficiency. But in general, I think that this study is here to show what you could feasibly do to advance the idea. So we have another study, and we can certainly talk about these. I just want to go through them before we get into the discussion about them. The other study, and Hudson, if you could go to your drawing that you created.
Yeah, I have these up.
Okay, great. So the other options that we looked at were one or more of these. What would be to put a site elevator out near the berm, which would be highly visible on Battery Place. It would have a minimal impact on the internal planning of the pavilion, and it would probably eliminate most of the safety concerns that you have. You would still have some concerns that you would normally find with a public elevator everywhere, and they're all over the city, including several at Battery Park City Authority. So the cons are obviously additional cost and some of these increased operation and maintenance concerns, but really the options here, you know, we wanted to study these as well because they're sort of more intuitive in terms of I think what you're maybe trying to achieve and what we talked about in February in terms of just trying to increase the accessibility to the park. So those are the studies that we did, and we really want to open it up, I think, you know, to conversation about what the pros and cons are here.
Are you done with the full presentation for the park at
Yes.
the pavilion? Are there other parts of the park that we'll be seeing? Or I just was figuring we would do it all in one fell swoop.
There's still a presentation on the sustainability elements of the pavilion to come. So if you'd like to finish go through that before we get to question and answers, that's fine.
Probably a good idea, Gwen. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. Let me know if you can't hear me okay. But I'm just going to jump right in here so we can get to the discussion. My name is Nikita Jathan. I am an environmental designer with Atelier 10. We are the sustainability consultant for the project, and I'll be providing an update today on the project and sustainability efforts. Last time we spoke with you all, we gave an overview on sustainability, but today I'll focus in a bit more detail on the pavilion building's sustainability approach. So next slide, please. So the project is addressing sustainability in a multitude of ways. However, to ensure that sustainability goals are met and documented and really align with important project drivers, 2 sustainability certifications are being pursued on this project. So for this study, we are pursuing WEDGE certification, Wedge is specifically designed to address waterfront developments and has goals for resilience, ecology, and promoting public access to the waterfront. For the Pavilion building, we are pursuing ILFI zero carbon certification. I'll talk a lot more about that in the following slides, but while the ILFI is well known for its meaningful and rigorous sustainability certifications, like you may have heard of Living Building Challenge, ILFI zero carbon is actually the first performance-based carbon standard of its kind, and we are really excited that this project has the opportunity to be an early adopter and really help push the industry forward. So while there are several site and building sustainability certifications out there, these two were chosen after a lot of review, primarily because of their close alignment with BPCA's sustainability plan. So next slide, please. Just zooming out for a moment, it's important to note how sustainability is really at the core program and design of this entire project, and that the Pavilion building is very much integrated in this site through its sustainability goals and features. So the building, as I mentioned, will be a net zero carbon building. Achieving zero carbon is really the culmination of many building strategies, starting with energy efficiency. An example of that is we've implemented geothermal or ground source heat pump technology. We're also removing on-site natural gas consumption and using low carbon materials in construction, and then finally offsetting the remainder of any of the building's actual carbon footprint. Next slide, please. The building is also really inherently connected to its surrounding site. It's really a resilient site and landscape design that is managing stormwater, is flood resilient, collects rainwater for reuse, and conserves potable water use. And this is all really tied into the building's sustainability as well. The site's attention to ecology and really an accessible, functional, and comfortable open outdoor space designed with attention to both rising sea levels and also rising temperatures is also, of course, key here. And again, very much connected to the building's intended programming, educational programming, and sustainability story. Next slide, please. So the building's ILFI zero carbon certification was identified by our group as the most meaningful way to approach BPCA's commitment to a low carbon future, because it really addresses what can be thought of as both halves of the carbon picture of the building. So I'll talk a little bit about what that means. First, it works to make the building as efficient as possible operationally and just simply use less energy. This is achieved through a variety of both passive and active design strategies. It's currently surpassing ILFI's 25% reduction target to an anticipated 38% reduction. And while this building is outside of the scope of carbon emissions legislation like New York City's Local 197, this reduction target puts the building in line with what that kind of legislation might require. And in fact, it goes even further by actually offsetting all of the energy that will be used by the building. The other extremely important side of the carbon picture that's often left out is embodied carbon. ILFI zero carbon requires that the building document the embodied carbon of the whole building's elements, reduce that embodied carbon, and then offset it. So at this time, the project is far exceeding that requirement of 10% and is actually anticipating about a 37% reduction. And I'll go into a little bit more detail on that on the next slide. I want to explain a little bit about embodied carbon and what it means. It refers to the sum of all of the emissions that are resulting from the extraction, manufacturing, and installation of all the building materials. And so when we consider how to slow down our global carbon emissions and keep global temperature rise at bay, addressing the emissions of creating building materials is really paramount because those emissions occur before anyone even steps foot in the building. So no matter how energy efficient a building may be, it's already effectively emitted all the carbon used to create the building. So this project has really taken specific care to reduce the embodied carbon of some major material drivers. We're replacing cement throughout concrete applications and using low carbon concrete, using high recycled content materials throughout, again, the building and the site, and using lower impact insulation materials, which can typically have some really harmful global warming potential. Next slide, please. So I just want to end on this graphic. There is a lot in here, but this graphic really, I think, helps convey the holistic sustainability approach of the building. To get to a net zero building, like I've said, doesn't just take one or two strategies, but really a strategic approach across the entire design that balances all building goals. So in addition to the carbon strategies that I discussed in a little bit of detail, the building is really addressing best practices across the board, whether that's water conservation, sustainable site design, healthier materials, renewables, envelope design, and so on. So maybe just to conclude, I'll highlight a few examples of where I think you really see some of these synergistic strategies that are doing a lot for the building in a lot of different ways that we've highlighted on this diagram. When you look at the interior spaces, daylight analysis has actually informed the design of these interior spaces to include things like operable shading, low emissivity glazing. All of this minimizes glare and solar heat gain while also really protecting those valuable views, embracing daylight, and effectively using less energy for lighting, helping us again get to that zero carbon goal. The building's systems use a whole variety of energy efficiency measures to use less energy. There's a whole laundry list of them. In particular, I want to highlight that there's a geothermal field below grade that will save a huge amount of energy for the building. There's also solar thermal panels, like Gabe mentioned earlier. Those directly address a major energy use of the building, which is tied to the hot water that's used in restrooms, and particularly the kitchen, which kitchens can be relatively energy intensive programs. And so this really addresses that head on. The building is also equipped for the use of additional renewables in the future that may be added to the building or site at any time. Wanted to talk a little bit about the restaurant component. The restaurant will actually notably use all electric equipment with no on-site combustion of gas. And the design team's engagement with a food service consultant has helped us to identify some efficient kitchen equipment that will be used in the space. So when a tenant is identified, that tenant will also follow a green lease that's being developed that helps tenants align with and contribute to all the sustainability goals that the building has worked so hard to build into the design, as well as its operations. I could go on forever. There's a lot else that's really baked into every aspect of this building, whether that's the program, like the restaurant, the building envelope, like you heard from Gabe in terms of those updates and continuous insulation, the mechanical systems, the really performative roof design, or even just the site that it's integrated within. But I hope this has been helpful to illuminate some of that. But I zoomed through that, and I think that's about it for sustainability. So I'll pass the mic back, but happy to answer any questions on sustainability.
Thank you, Nikita.
I think that's the end of the presentation, Alice.
Great, thanks very much, Gwen, and all the team. That's very helpful to hear from you. So it is a good time to open it up for questions. What are we at 7:30? So this is the only thing on our agenda. So I hope that everyone gets a chance to get whatever questions they may have answered and clarity that they need. Gwen, could you just give us a little bit of the overview as to the timing on this project? What are the next steps in the approval process? If we could, what comes next here?
Yeah, I'm actually gonna let Jenny answer that question because she has got all of those dates committed to memory, and I don't.
Okay, great, thanks, Jenny.
Just make sure I'm unmuted. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. So important just to qualify for the Pavilion and for Wagner Park and the Museum of Jewish Heritage, they will be in a construction, well, two construction packages actually, that are following a separate timeline to Imperial Plaza and the Battery. So just very quickly, we're at 95% for the Pavilion, Wagner Park, and the Museum of Jewish Heritage areas. We're looking at being at 100% for those documents in June. And looking at this stage based on our EIS development, starting construction on those packages in early 2022.
Where are you with the EIS? Is there, is that done or, I mean, we're,
No, EIS is still in progress. We are looking at issuing a scoping document to the public, and actually, we don't have the consultants on board to talk about that in detail. But there will be a scoping document going out to the public within, I believe, the next 6 weeks. And then the full draft EIS will be going out for review in September. There will be a hearing sometime in September as well.
could you share with us any other public review processes that are part of this project with the pavilion construction package and the park itself that the public should be aware of?
Those are the primary public review processes.
Okay.
Alice, can you ask, by the way, we would really like to have the final dates on those so that they are filed so we know where the public can opine.
The
Okay.
final date
Yeah.
on what, Tammy? I'm
Yeah,
sorry, I didn't
Tammy,
understand the question.
this is Nick Sport, and we have the dates final. We'll get them over to you. I think
Yeah.
Gwen, she was saying the final dates for when the scoping document is going to go out, when the public hearings are with
Okay.
respect to the EIS.
Yeah.
So yeah, once we have those dates, certainly we'll send them over to you.
The EIS is the only review process that we have to go through and for the whole project, except for the PDC's review of the 2 walls and the battery entry. Is that correct?
And the Imperial Plaza that is also subject to PDC review.
Along with
And
Sorry?
along with the public footpath along Battery Place, the full length of the project in front of Wagner, and then into First Place. So any of those city lands are subject to the PDC review.
That's what I thought. So in fact, the Battery Place piece of this would go to PDC. Yeah, that, I think that wasn't mentioned
the
earlier.
right of way, the right of way that's owned by DOT, yes.
Yeah, actually, could we flip back? There was a slide at the end of the pavilion that actually showed a rendering. These visuals were presented back in February. This one here, so we can see that essentially the knee wall on the left-hand side, as part of our also physical site security barrier to stop vehicles, is framing up the bottom of the Wagner berm. So the allays are ramping up on the left-hand side. This is essentially the experience you have on the street. As you move down Battery Place, there you see then the sort of exposed section of stone wall as the ramp raises up to the lawn height and then tapers back down again. And the landscape team has worked to sort of create a lot of visual interest in the planting palette along the extent of that. But it's important to note that this image will be part of the PDC submission, but really is just subject to the area to the right of that stone wall.
Thanks, Jennifer. That's helpful.
That means that there'll be no change, or they can't input the plantings part. They're just talking about the stone wall part. Is that right?
They're actually just talking about the footpath. The stone wall is part of BPC land.
Okay, so I guess we're going to open this up to questions. We might be best to sort of follow the way that the presentations were provided in terms of the flood wall, the columns, the Wagner Park Pavilion and such, but I don't think it really matters, and I guess everyone will chime in to their expertise. So I open it up to the committee first for questions and comments and such. Betty Kay. Welcome, thanks.
Oh, sorry, I'm not on the committee.
True. You're right. I forgot, but it's okay. I've started with you, so continue.
Mine is from the first part, and it was the last slide on the first part, which was called Exposed Walls Columns.
And to help out here, I'm just going to ask that everyone who has questions on the flood wall columns portion, let's ask those now, so they have to keep flipping back and forth.
Yes, thanks. I am a scooter user and I noticed a lot of stairs here. So if you could tell me a little more about this entrance, because obviously there are a lot of people with strollers and other things besides wheelchairs. That how do they enter here?
Sure. And Hogan, do we have the plan view in this deck? So
I'm just flipping back to see if we do.
Yeah. So Betty Kay, we presented in more detail on Imperial Plaza at the last meeting on February 22nd, and there were plans that actually showed how we were dealing with accessibility. This particular deck was really about the stone cladding of the flood wall. Maybe it's worth, we certainly send you a link to that past presentation. But
maybe if we have enough time while we're talking about some other things, we can get that that plan and that rendering to put on the screen.
And that's fine.
Sure. And I'd also just like to note while we look for
Can I make my point?
in this elevation that you can see from the street, the stairs are here in the center. Just to the left and just to the right are ramps as well, and they bring you to the same place that the stairs do.
Yeah.
So I'll pull up a plan as well, but just we have that for now.
Actually,
Can I just say,
oh, sorry, go on.
I just say, as a user, there need to be signs by the stairs because everyone gets dropped off there, and I'm used to going by myself. I can't go with anybody else in my group, but if there's at least signs so I know where to go, that would be helpful by stairs, and they could just be on the wall on either side. Discreet.
Sure. Actually, we did include a wayfinding plan, Hogan. I think it's at the beginning of the pavilion section. This one here, really actually difficult to read for you as well, Betty Kay, because it's zoomed right out. But I think what this plan was identifying, and I know we talked about this in more detail last time as well, was that, you know, our primary arrival points to this project site are at the 9A intersection, and then also at the Museum of Jewish Heritage. So when we're looking at how we're addressing wayfinding and understanding vehicular arrival, pedestrian arrival, and also public transport arrival, when you cross that intersection at 9A, there is actually going to be, we have the Battery Park City wayfinding package, which is being constructed and installed actually at the moment, and we've continued the strategy for the wayfinding signage package into Wagner Park, Imperial Plaza. So you will be greeted with a pylon map at those kind of two critical arrival points, which will help to orient you as to where to go. Then they are sort of supplemented with pole-mounted wayfinding signs as well, which will help you with some additional directional guidance. So we've looked quite closely at that in tandem with our wayfinding consultants, and also looked at it in the context of the battery wayfinding system as well, because they do need to complement each other. And then the team, the Acorn design team, worked hard to make sure that intuitively a lot of the landscape features help to guide you in the direction that the signage was leading you as well. So if we pull that plan up by the end of the meeting, it'd be good to just quickly talk you through again that flow.
No, I get that, but you're not getting my point. My point is, if you're with a group, they will be attracted to the stairs. If there was a queue by the stairs where the group is going, where the person who's going to be singled out knows where, I can search around. I'm not smart enough to go out and look for wayfinding. I'm trying to save the bother of having to do that, because they already have to separate and go to the other location. You're asking them to go look around and then go to the other location. I'm just saying, if you could discreetly put something on the edge carved into the stone that said just wheelchairs that way, that would be a hint.
Sure,
you actually should be able to see those.
We can definitely do that. I really want you to see the renderings that we had prepared there, because I want to make sure that we completely understand what it is that's your point, so that we make sure that we address that. I want us to be able to address that.
Yes, Betty, absolutely. If it's a matter of signage, certainly we'll get the signs in the right place.
Well, yeah, just a groove in the stone. I mean, but thank you.
Oh, here's a rendering. So
Here we
Betty, yeah,
go.
this is the view. You're on the north side of Battery Place. You're crossing the 9A intersection. That is the set of stairs immediately in front of you that takes you up. And we mentioned that there's the signage pylon. This is that big pedestrian arrival point. Just to the right, you can see the ramp that actually slips up and takes you to the LAs. So that's within very close proximity and direct line of sight. There is a similar one on the left as well. You can see the person with the wheelchair that then takes you up to the left side, up to the plaza as well. So both of those are to the immediate, sort of flanking the immediate sides of the stairs.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. So let's, on the exposed flood wall and the columns, do we have questions? I see Bob Schneck.
Okay. You want me to go next?
Sure.
Okay. I just wanted to say that at the beginning of this meeting, Alice pointed out that CB1 has passed a number of resolutions. And as we pass those resolutions, often in meetings, people say, oh, I'll get back to you on that. Some of the questions we've asked over time are really important questions. And has anyone ever made a checklist of all the kinds of items in those resolutions and how they're resolved, and coming back to our meetings and talking about how each one is resolved? In particular, three that hit me right off the top of my head is I was worried about skateboards, for example. Lots of times, wherever there's a serious incline, skateboards are going to find them and skateboards are going to use them. And now people tend to use all kinds of electric vehicles, scooters and things everywhere on the sidewalk. And so now we have these very long ramps. And in earlier meetings, people said that they were going to see, or at least consider those kinds of dangers on these ramps and how those vehicles would be accommodated. No reference to anything like that. Many, many times over and over again, I asked for some level of treatment of budgets of these things and how much these things cost and how much the public will pay for them and how much it costs to build that building up on top of the hill and how much it costs for those incredible ramps and how much it'll cost even to maintain those wonderful walls of flowers that everywhere else we have them in this part of the world, they fall apart and the maintenance fails after a couple of years. Finally, this community board has stood behind Passive House for a long time. So when the BPCA stands for carbon zero, Passive House, for example, is in the fight to make efficient buildings building code in the state of New York. If you only have a few buildings and a startup for that kind of work, nothing happens. Passive House has been involved with the fight to drive away. There was a Rebney piece of legislation in the budget of the executive budget of the governor that would allow alternative investment to supporting local law 97. This carbon zero has nothing to do with local law 97. Passive House for years has worked together with LEED to improve the LEED standard, which looks after a lot of the residual carbon. So a lot of these things are things that are actually in action by the efficiency community in construction. And so being an early adopter of something doesn't really solve a problem. So back to at least the first one, the CB1 resolutions have passed over and over again for a long time. What's happened to them?
Bob, I can start. This is Nick Spordone, and thank you for that. I've at all those meetings, always enjoyed them. And I know that for our part, at least, I can't speak for other entities, but for the Battery Park City Authority's part, at least, we obviously take the community board's resolutions very seriously. We've gone through them line by line. I know Jenny and I have done it a number of times, as has Gwen, as have others. So if there are outstanding questions about what happened on particular items in those resolutions, please ask the question. We can go through them now. Skateboards, Look, a public park is a public park, and it's open to everybody. Certainly, though, the safety of people who use the park is of paramount importance. So if it becomes an instance where skateboards or other types of wheel devices are something that is a matter of concern for folks, we'll take the appropriate action through either additional signage or additional presence of our security team. I do, though, I think I'd want to start by not kind of presenting folks with a brand new park and immediately start taking things away from them about you can't go here, you can't go there. So I think the idea would be if there is an instance where skateboards become a problem, we'll certainly be with you every step of the way and take the immediate steps to address it. And in terms of cost,
okay, I just visit the skateboard matter just for a second. What
sure.
I would say is I walk 5 to 8 miles a day on the Esplanade and on sidewalks in Battery Park City. I almost get hit by these things all the time, especially those guys on one wheel, and then there's the really fast scooter. And then there's even little kids barreling into this stuff now. So these things are a real danger. You don't have to wait. I don't have to wait to show you examples unless I have to call you from the hospital. So
well,
other people
Bob,
I've been right with have almost gotten clipped a lot of times. I mean, so it's a real problem. It should be into the planning.
I mean, it's a problem with shared space probably for as long as there has been shared space, right? People using parks have probably always had concerns about other people using parks in ways that maybe they don't necessarily feel super safe with. So safety is a paramount concern for everyone using our parks. As an immediate measure, if there are concerns that you have at particular times of the day of people
You're missing my point, Nick.
or in other areas, then I want you to call me and let me know.
That these things were brought up in previous resolutions. So I want to know how the Battery Park City Authority looked at those resolutions and what it did, and then report back to us on what it did about them, not talk about you need an accident in the future in order to take an action.
Yeah. So Bob, I know that in the meeting last time, Hogan did present on some of the anti-skateboarding treatments that we were looking at for ledges, for benches. So there were some details that were included in that. Those are pretty reflective of what's going to be applied across the entire project site. We can come back to you with more information in regards to the surface treatments at ramps. It sounds like that's something you'd like to see a little bit more information of, and how those are being used as deterrents for skateboarders going down inclines. And we can certainly, because they weren't presented last time, so we can get that information for you. But this is something that, I mean, clearly because you know, we're concerned with public safety and that everyone can enjoy all of the open spaces that are within the project site, that we definitely look at these things from a design standpoint as well. So if there are very, very specific things you'd like to see that detail on, and I'm hearing you want to see more in terms of the ramp surface, and we can also show you how some of those other treatments are being applied across the broader site that were presented last time.
I think Bob's point, if I could just say, thank you, Bob, is very important in that in answering to the community's hard work with working with you on many resolutions. And I think he is right that many of the requests and thoughts that we had, though, addressed or nodded to were not fully resolved. I think that's fair, and that's to be expected, I guess. That actually I just want to add to Bob's questions was the bike situation. I know that came up many times, is the idea of having a separate bike area, lane. Could you use the street? And I'm not sure we heard about, well, I know we didn't hear about that tonight. Could you just respond to where the bikes are going?
Let me provide a little bit of an update. I know that we had talked before about the prospect of a bike lane in Battery Place. We have had conversations with DOT, and they're willing to work with us if it's something that the community supports on a bike lane for Battery Place. The proviso that we were presented with was that it wouldn't just be that area. If they were going to do a bike lane or approve a bike lane for Battery Place, it needed to go all the way up to West Thames. There would be potential parking impacts. And so we are certainly, as the authority, very willing to work with the community and with City DOT on trying to evaluate the prospect of a bike lane for Battery Place.
Well, that's great to hear, Gwen. Maybe we could arrange for something at the next, I don't know, this would of course be Betty Kay's domain.
Yeah, I
but-
think Betty and then also
And
us.
Battery, right,
Yeah.
right.
So
Maybe
Betty,
like a-
let's talk about it, because yeah, I think it's an interesting concept. So yeah, I think it's all connected, bottom
I
line.
actually want to note that you did have a bicycle working group that was determined with the signage and the wayfinding that made recommendations. So it wouldn't necessarily have to go all the way to West Thames. And transportation alternatives was part of that working group.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true. Not to fuss with it, but
Well,
that was before they made these changes. I have no idea if any of these
And-
changes
and-
would change it up.
And maybe there's something that we need to reconcile in terms of what we're hearing from DOT and what came out of. I know there was the results of the bicycle working group. So, but in any event, we're happy to carry that ball forward with you and with DOT.
Okay, great. So I guess Justine and Betty, you can take over there. And then could you Bob had the questions on costs. Could you review that with us all?
Yeah, we are. Where are we with our most recent cost estimates, Jenny?
I think we're expecting to see it by the end of this month. So it's based on the 95% documents.
Okay, so that will give us a really good idea of where we are with the cost for the project, with the exception of the interior drainage elements, because those have not been incorporated into the cost estimate because we're not far enough along with the design on that. As far as long-term operating costs, operating and maintenance costs, that's something that we don't have yet, but we do intend to create a picture of what the operating and maintenance costs impact over time for the project will be. So these are things that we're working on. We should be able to provide you with the cost information on the project within the next few weeks. If it's going to be about a month from now when we get the 95% cost estimate, we will share that with you.
Just out of curiosity, what is the cost of the pavilion? I mean, you must have some, ballpark estimate of what that will cost, of just to give a sense of it.
I don't recall. Do you? I think, yeah, I believe including all the markups, it's in around 35 million.
35 million.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is
All
that
right, well,
just for the Alice? Is that for the
is-
planning alone, or is that for the full construction package?
Full construction package. So that's again including all the markups on the direct costs. It is comparable to something along the lines of the Brooklyn Botanical Gardens Visitor Center, just in terms of the quality of detailing construction that we're looking at, and also the types of sustainability features. That project also has a geothermal field. It has architectural concrete. It has green roofs. It has a lot of rainwater collection. So that certainly has been a baseline comparable that we've been working towards in terms of cost and quality.
So
could I go on with my
Yeah.
questions about cost? Just a couple of insights.
Sure.
What happens is that if someone took the time to comb through all the resolutions, we're looking at 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 issues. There would be 30 issues that were never really properly vetted and resolved at these meetings. But one cost concern I have is I've been a supporter of the Battery Park Conservancy for a long time, and Worry Price has been the heart of that for a long time. and she built this amazingly beautiful context for us, and we've lived with it for a long time. I was shocked to see these very high security walls that I won't be able to even look in the park anymore. But in terms of cost, there have been investors and patrons of the Battery Park Conservancy that paid for all that granite that you see out there, and paid for all those parklands you see. And a lot of this project is going to not respect them. I don't even remember seeing those high walls kind of appear in Battery Park. I don't know that we need them, but one of the things we were fighting for in earlier resolutions is not to change the direction of the bike path. That wasn't even handled here, but we wanted to preserve the trees. We had ideas about that we liked the way things were. All these things are just, it's like treating our community like a sandbox, and you just get to go in and play in it. And what our preferences are don't seem to matter very much, including in the Conservancy, which is our sight line to old New Amsterdam. So what happened in the how much did it cost to kind of renovate the battery that we're just throwing away?
So Bob, maybe to answer your first question about the security walls, I think it's important to recognize the walls that we were presented earlier today they're not security walls. They're actually part of the primary flood wall. Hogan, do you mind just flipping back to a couple of the images there? So yeah, and maybe the overall elevation. I know this is a bit hard to. Okay. Actually, the plan, I'm sorry, I'm going to jump around, get you guys seasick. The plan that's actually showing Imperial Plaza that has the walls in blue, that might be helpful. So just recapping with essentially the flood barrier, which is the premise for this project. And, you know, we've located this wall, and we've designed this wall, and working with this community as well over the last couple of years to address a 2050 1 in 100 year storm event. And what that means when we've done extensive coastal modeling is that for a storm of that type, you know, the height of the water is going to get to roughly 18 feet in areas like Imperial Plaza, 18 feet above sea level. You would have heard us use the term the height of intervention. So that's the height of the wall above grade. In a place like Imperial Plaza, for instance, where grade is around 6 or 7 feet, that ends up being like a 14-foot, 11 to 14-foot tall wall, depending on where you are at. So we certainly, as one of the primary design drivers through this whole process, have been very protective about public space, about making sure that we're not blocking access to public space and the experience of public space. And hence throughout the alignment, ranging from the museum all the way through to Wagner Park, across Imperial Plaza and into the Battery, it's always been about trying to minimize the exposure of that wall and maximize access to space. And our solutions have always changed. Within Imperial Plaza itself, we ended up raising up the plaza to about 11 feet. And what that does is it protects against tidal flooding in actually up to 2100. And then above that, we've introduced flip-up gates. And that way we can keep that plaza completely open. Now, you do need to seal those gates up against something, so hence the columns, the odd columns, and I believe they're spaced around sort of 80, 90 feet apart. So it's reasonably spaced. That then during a storm event, and only during a storm event, those gates will flip up, and then they will create that barrier. Now, there are some areas that we can't do that. And one of those areas is actually, you can see it on the screen right now, it's a big blue line between Imperial Plaza and the Battery. And the reason we can't do that is because we have the tunnel underneath it. And the tunnel actually comes right up to about 1 foot underneath the existing plaza paving. So there's no space to put in a foundation for that wall. And if you're spanning across that tunnel, which is it's about an 80-foot span, it means that you end up with a massive beam. So we took that and we integrated it into the wall, recognizing that there was really no way around having an exposed wall in this section. Now that piece of exposed wall, when we look at our design flood elevation and our height of intervention above grade, is roughly, well, where we get to the Battery, that's about 9.5, 10 feet tall. And that's what you're seeing in that rendering, is that piece of flood wall. Now, the opening to the battery itself has another flip-up gate so that we could maintain that access through. Again, only in a storm event, that flip-up gate will close and it'll seal it off. And so therefore we're essentially creating that flood barrier to stop that 2051 in 100 year storm event from getting to the other side and creating problems in downtown Manhattan. Now, where that wall then continues, the fortunate aspect of the battery itself is that the grade naturally rises. By the time we get up to Bowling Green area, State Street, it actually matches our design flood elevation. So we're actually at natural grade. The decision in this instance to take that wall and actually disappear it into a berm was one that was done with in collaboration with Parks, I think in alignment with their Parks Without Borders initiative, the idea of not putting solid walls up against the edge of park spaces. Obviously, we couldn't avoid it where we're going over the tunnel. So that's something that we very deliberately have created a feature out of, and Hogan presented to you earlier about some of the design concepts surrounding that wall itself that we have been collaborating with Parks on. But going into the battery itself, we really wanted to recreate the experience that you have right now, but recognizing we do have a large flood wall. The flood wall does have a 15-foot sort of offset within which you cannot build trees. So the alignment was selected in order to create a buffer to allow for certain setbacks that we wanted to achieve, and to allow us to actually reintroduce new trees in areas and let that to grow out, and to recreate a reasonably similar look and feel to what you have there today. It's not going to be exactly the same. It can't be. We're introducing a big flood wall, but the intent has been to try to recreate that while introducing a flood wall. So that's been one of the drivers. That is what we presented last January in 2020. We talked through the development of that flood wall component, and as we just mentioned now, obviously, there's the further evolution of the detailing of the stone wall where that is exposed.
Bob, if it's okay, if we can take your passive house question when we get back to the building and let other folks just talk about.
It's fine.
Is that okay?
I don't mean to. Of course, I don't mean to dominate this so much, but there's so much missing, and I happen to personally be very concerned about how much has been missing for so many years of consideration given by so many people, and so much good thinking ignored. So I'm done.
No, we'll
Sorry,
come
I'm going to
back
have
you
to
on
push
the
back on
passive
that,
house.
Alice. Tell us, Bob, tell us what is missing. We have been at this with you for many years, and we're not going anywhere. We're in this together. So please, by all means, Alice, tell us what's missing. Now, remember,
I'm not the person saying this, Nick. So
total unanimity is not necessarily a possible thing, right? Ed Cott said, if you agree with me on 9 out of 12 issues, vote for me. If you agree with me on 12 out of 12, see a psychiatrist. So I'm not suggesting that we're going to reach total agreement in everything, but I do certainly want to make it clear that we are committed to addressing, to the best of our ability, the concerns that are raised by the committee. We are very serious about it. We've engaged with you from the start. We will continue to be engaged with you. So if we're missing something that you feel as though we haven't at least given some serious thought to, please tell me. That's what we want to hear, and that's why we're here.
Right, we appreciate that, and so
Thank
we will. So this is Bob's opinion, and he's entitled to it as a member that has been in good standing for a long time, and I'm sure there'll be more detail there. In any case, we often credit you, and it's very fair to say you have certainly engaged with the community on this project. So maybe not entirely the way each member would like, I think is what's being stated here. So just to move on, I'm going to ask Laura Starr to speak up if she'd like. Laura, are you there?
I'm muted. Sorry, mute. I was muted. How technically can you build all of this flood defense system without the interior drainage? Because you said the interior drainage was like phases behind, like it was still being studied. You didn't know how much it would cost and all of that. And like that's the kind of flip side of the berm system is the bathtub effect behind it.
Exactly. And we have the design on the interior drainage element has required us to have a lot of interface with DEP, which has taken a little while. And we're in the process of doing some additional modeling that DEP has requested, and we expect that by the time we're done with that, which will take a few weeks, we'll have the ability to move forward in a much faster way with the design process. So it's not that we are looking at doing the project without the interior drainage. We're just looking at the reality that the design for the barrier system is ahead of the interior drainage.
Right, but my question, Gwen, was, can you build and have this berm system be functional without the interior drainage? Like, really, the interior drainage should be built first, right, before you create the conditions that would create this bathtub effect.
I think as long as they're constructed and completed at the same time, you're right. Like, you know, the barrier system is compromised if we're not addressing the interior drainage. So as long as the projects sync by the time the barrier system is completed, that's what we're targeting.
And are you assuming that they will sync?
Yes.
We're expecting that the interior drainage system will take less time to build, so that by the time we're completed, they will sync at the end.
Okay, and I appreciate that this wall system at the Battery is, you know, part of this Parks Without Borders, which obviously the wall system is not a park without a border. Now that the author of Parks Without Borders has stepped down, is there a chance of rethinking the wall system a bit?
We are not looking at rethinking that. I think that we had gotten our project partners' agreement on this approach. We are satisfied with the design, which I think is been very thoughtfully done. We're trying to minimize the impacts to any kind of negative impacts to the park in terms of loss of trees, et cetera. But
well, you're losing over 24 trees, you know that, right? Like, and a lot of them are mature trees. Like you're losing like a whole mature habitat there. And even more than that, you know, I was just, since I have the advantage of being at my house, one of my, you know, favorite books on New York is, you know, this book of Gotham, and it starts off, "Oh, this is Eden," exalted the Dutch poet Jacob Steendam, a terrestrial Canaan, blah, 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 where the land floweth with milk and honey. And like, basically, like the Battery, what it's about, like when you talk about the Hudson River, it's sheer natural abundance. And the Battery as a park, as with all the horticulture that Pete Oldoff did, you know, that we did with him, like the whole thing is this, it's like Lower Manhattan's immersion in the natural abundance of the Hudson River Valley. And so when you put up the entrance of these big stone walls, you're negating that. And, you know, like maybe they could at least be green walls or something softer. But I think it's really a shame. Like the reason Manhattan was settled, that like when you look at Lower Manhattan and you see the skyscrapers, that happened because of the natural abundance of the Hudson Valley. That's why this place was settled. And I think it's a shame that a stone wall is now what people are going to be seeing instead of like an ivy or Virginia creeper covered wall, or just something that says, you know, oh, nature, like the sheer force of nature, which is actually why you're doing the project, because of the sheer force of nature with sea level rise and tides and all of that. That's what I wanted to say.
We did address the suggestion of ivy covered wall at the last at the last meeting. I don't think you were there, Laura. Hogan, do you have anything that you want to add in response to that? Because I know that we did look at that.
Yeah, thanks,
Is
Gwen.
Hogan still on?
So, I mean, I think to your point about the greening of these walls, that all has to be done in consideration of FEMA requirements, maintenance requirements, and what is going to be ultimately the best solution in perpetuity. There were some studies done that we presented last time to the committee, to the Conservancy, looking at what it would take to introduce a planter on the flood wall to kind of green it up a little bit, something that could cascade down potentially. Because of the structural requirements of the wall, especially located here, and as it extends across the battery entrance, what's necessary to add a planter to this wall would actually increase the height significantly. The depth of the planting needed is what you would need on top of this wall, in addition to whatever planter structure is needed to separate that planting from the FEMA certified flood wall. We also studied what it would take to put that on the backside of the flood wall, so thereby widening the wall to add a planter into it. And we run into a conflict here with the battery underpass vent, as well as the really limited space in between this vent and the curb, which is necessary to accommodate pedestrian, bicycle, and emergency vehicle turn movements. And it ultimately makes the wall about 5.5 feet wide, even if we were able to do that. So ultimately, at the end of the day, what we suggest is that adding a planter onto this wall to screen the view of the battery beyond is not an ideal strategy, because it increases the height of the wall or the width, and you ultimately end up screening the mature vegetation that we are able to preserve behind it.
Okay, thanks for that answer. I guess those are my questions on this part of the project. Thank you.
Alice, I can't seem to raise my hand. This is Wendy, so you can come back to me later. But
No, go ahead, Wendy. Go right ahead. Don't worry
about that tonight. I had a question about the wall, because you gave us the two renderings. The St. Sebastian granite, just by the way, is that a special type of granite? Does it come from the Northeast? Like, where do you get it from? Like, or is it just the color that meant something to you? Or, do any of these things come from New York State? I mean, I know it's a specific question, but I have more questions about the wall. But the St. Sebastian kind of just kept popping out as like a very specific granite. Is it as specific as I was hearing?
This is a specific granite that we've located in quarries in the Northeast that is available in the quantities that are necessary for this project. It comes from the same quarries that the Stansted Gray and the Pearl Gray stones do. I don't know the exact location of the quarry offhand, I apologize, but it is something that we selected in sort of concert with availability and regional sourcing in mind. Yeah.
It's abundant and cheap. Okay, well, that sounds fine. I wanted to ask, I certainly prefer the idea of having something more specific with the map, the second version, which Worry Price told us at one point, if you're going to show up and there's a wall there, she'd like it to be something that's a little bit more meaningful. It still seems very abstract, right? I mean, is it going to actually say this is Manhattan and this is the Hudson, or is it just an abstract of it? It's not really a map, right? It's more of an essence of a map. Is that what I'm seeing?
That's correct. Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, so it's more abstract. I know that being blatant with maps is kind of out of style right now. I hope somewhere in the park, more specific places where we can talk about the amazing, topography and history. If that's not the place, maybe something else. How about, I think it's pretty, in terms of the bike path currently, I just wanted to go back to that concept, and I know it's not our committee. I think it's really important to just note that the bike path as it is right now is so attractive. So many people walk on it, and it causes problems for the bikes. So that's a separate issue for other committees to talk about later on. And if I can indulge everyone a little bit longer on a slightly different topic, we didn't see an image of the what the access of the garage door coming into the new, the facility looks like now, right? We didn't see the new.
Yeah, we did actually. Perhaps Hogan, could you jump back to that page? We did skip over it, the detail of it. It was presented also on February 22nd. So if we could.
Because this you guys are showing this, but it is a lot coming very.
Yes, no, it's a lot of information. We'll bring it up for you.
See, that
it's on the screen.
It's hard to understand what I'm looking at. I don't see the plants. I don't see, that's not a street view. That's and listen, I'm struggling to.
No, you're absolutely right. And I will say that we had asked for architectural plans. First of all, we've gotten a few, and we had asked for perspectives of this particular location because it was so controversial, because you're looking into a service entrance from a city street and all the rest. But that is the same, as you point out, that we saw the last time. It's quite tiny and very difficult to assess what's really going to look like. But
and
I
quite
think
frankly,
that's a fair criticism.
Yeah, if that's it, we can do better than that. Even if it's a service entrance, you can do better than that. That is not worthy of the spot. I don't know what it should be, but
Agreed 100%.
it is. I am still so frustrated with this building, and I'm so excited about all the, environmental parts of it, the cistern. There's so many great things, but the building itself is still missing. This is going to be a building that when we show up, I'm going to be frustrated. And I don't agree with, I understand you're 95% done, but I just want to say as a member, I feel like there has been a fail on this building, and it's close, but no cigar. And this slide right now is a perfect example. It's not good enough. And, I don't know what it should be. I'm not a landscape architect, or an architect, but I can just tell you this is not good. So it just
let me ask if I could ask a little bit more about this, because this is you're right. This is something that we've all kind of tried to work through, make better, because there's a little bit of a conflict in what we're trying to achieve here, because this is by its nature back of house space.
Right.
We've got
even at the back of house, it could be actually greened up.
No, I get it. By necessity, we have wanted to make sure that it is not something that draws too much attention to itself, because then it looks like a public entrance, which it's not.
Well, and
so it needs to be subtle. But I'm interested in hearing more, because this actually may be, even though that we're far along with the design, this may be something that allows us, if we can kind of understand what you're looking for, maybe there is something that we can still do here.
I hate the idea, but even if it's all completely covered with fake plants, so you don't see it. I want everything to be real because I'm a gardener and I care about these things. But even if the thing was covered with fake plants or fake stones or fake something, so that it's like if you go into someone's house and it looks like a bookshelf, but instead it's a door into a secret room, Like, that's what I really think it should be. It needs to be a secret room. And this is not a secret room. This is a backup where you put the dumpster. And that's not good enough for this space.
So Wendy, and maybe the graphic doesn't represent what the intent is. Hogan, do you mind zooming in on the red call out on the elevation?
Yeah.
If you go back to the yeah. So I think, you know, our approach to the Wagner berm stretch and facade is to really try to treat this like a landscape. And hence the berm that's going up and meeting the ramp. Obviously, we do have an entrance at this point, and where the retaining wall comes out of the landscape, we wanted to treat that like it is a landscape element, a retaining wall in the landscape. It has the stone cladding, which is also used elsewhere in the landscape, and the detailing of that. And apologies if that's not clear on this. If you pan up a little bit, Hogan. Was really trying to create a flush look with the doors. So in a metal finish that would blend with the stone and have it sit flush with the outer edge of the stone as well. So we try to avoid a look that felt like a garage door. It just felt like a series of panels that blended in with the stone that were actually operable. So it should read like an element of the landscape.
I didn't tell you if it's going to look like the picture. It does not do it. You're not accomplishing what you're saying you're trying to. Could you put the stone facade stuff or some facsimile of it, because you probably can't put stone in, on the doors and make it blend in, or come up with something that makes it blend in, because it really does. It looks like it looks like garbage. It looks.
Yeah. Yeah, we can take another look at that. So if the intent is to really blend that out, we don't see the doors, we can work harder at the detailing on that.
I mean, I get
be a sign of public
if
access.
I could say this, if it's supposed, I get it's supposed to be the back door and the back entrance and what's not seen and kind of what people aren't going to see, but this is what the hotel is looking at. This is what people, as they're driving into Battery Park City, as you're coming around that corner, if I'm getting it correct, this is what we're looking at. So this is our welcome into our community from that end. This is not acceptable as when I'm looking to you, because I know you guys can do better. I
think we've made this point now for many, many months, and this has not yet been answered. We have not seen the drawings we've asked for, and we haven't seen change to this. So I think, you know, if there's room for more, obviously the community has asked for that. And I think the points are valid, and it is not just the back end of a building, it fronts a city street. And it was once, we will all have a memory, the view onto the harbor. So it is critical that it gets to be done beautifully. And I guess folks are not yet convinced about what it really will be, and maybe you can give offer more detail or more thought on it. I mean, I will just say that stainless steel mesh guardrail that's going around and goes up and down all 150 or 300 feet of the ramp is, I'm not sure I understand the choice, but I'm sure there's a reason for it, but it does seem a little aggressive also. We haven't discussed any of the details or the materials of the pavilion. That kind of guardrail is tremendously impactful on this project. It's what, you know, you're not looking at a ramp where you're just walking up and down with some trees. You're walking up and down looking at that stainless steel mesh, which is shown here as very open. Am I wrong? Is that open or closed? Is it a stainless steel mesh the whole way? It's not
I missed that.
It's the stainless steel woven mesh.
Yeah, it's the whole way. It's not showing here. Yeah.
We are recommending this product because of its openness specifically, because it has the qualities to allow a line of sight through it with limited obstruction. So there are a lot of different guardrail projects out there, but this is sort of a woven expanded mesh that can be attached to the guardrail, which is necessary. You know, we want it to be as open as possible. So that is something that we did consider very closely.
I'm sure. Yeah, no, it's not an easy problem.
I'm sorry to interrupt again, but can we go back to the elevator as well? Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I interrupted Wendy. Go ahead, Wendy.
I apologize because I want Gwen to answer if she needs to, but you know, the idea of bringing this elevator back into the concept and, you know, maybe that can somehow hide the, I mean, I know you have to have these little electric vehicles and the cars going in and out of there, but I think there has to be something, you know, something visually more interesting. And I will say with Alice is that I totally agree that we want to make this park completely accessible to all people with all abilities. And even though it's ADA compliant, and I was one of the big people that brought that up at that first meeting probably 2.5 years ago, because I spend a lot of time with Battery Park seniors. I think it would have been stressful for me to push my friend who just died recently up on the wheelchair all that way. I would have much preferred come up on the street flat and then take her up on the elevator to that level, and then we can enjoy it. You know, I think pushing my friend up the wheelchair ramp from one end to the other, I don't know if I would go to this park. So just back to Alice's point. But anyway, I don't mean to complain again, but I want to say once again, I know that this is going to be a problem when I show up in person. And I'm going to say, I know I'm going to feel the same way. I'm going to be like, this is just as annoying as it was on paper. And I just feel like if I'm quiet on this, I'm going to kick myself. So I want to make sure that on this point that I am, as a community member, saying this one part of your project, and there's so many good parts of the project, and I'm so excited about how you've made so many difficult choices better, but this is going to be a problem if it stays as is. So that's enough of my rave. Sorry about that.
No ranting. Thanks, Tammy. I'm not sure this doesn't.
Wendy.
I was going to say, yeah, blame it on Tammy.
Could I just inquire a little bit more? Because I don't want to leave this topic quite yet, because again, this is, I will tell you, this is something that I've struggled with, that I've had many conversations with our design team about. And what I believe that what they have come up with is something that they felt was responsive to the desire to make it what it felt is elegant looking, but pretty you know, subtle. And so what I want to understand more, because I want to be able, if we can make some change or adjustments here with the appearance of that service entrance and that the face of it. I would like to know a little bit more. I know that you've talked a little bit about some thoughts that you had, but I would like to know a little bit more about what it is that you would like to see here, and what the things are that may be bothersome to you.
So one of the things I loved that was so amazing is out at the hills on Governor's Island, the scramble. And so that there's the roll, you know, the path that you can go up that's to the top of the hills. There's no elevator there. I totally get it. But there's also a scramble. And the idea here is that, you know, if you have to have an elevator, and you don't have to, obviously you guys don't have to, but I would love to have an elevator on street level so that so that people that don't have electric wheelchairs, that's the problem. And, you know, maybe the grading is so gentle, it's not hard to push up. I mean, that's the other thing from a picture. I'm having a hard time understanding how high it's going to be. But to me, going up, 8 to 10 feet, that's going to be a pretty big push uphill.
I don't want to cut this conversation.
Help a little bit.
Yeah, I don't want to cut the conversation short, Gwen, on this, but we've reviewed it a lot, and there's been many suggestions. I think the fact is this is a brand new building with a brand new landscape. There's nothing retrofitted here. Anything can be created. Anything could be redone at this point. So, you know, it's an open tabula rasa, and let's not forget it. So you have to move an elevator or move an entryway or whatever you want, you could do it. And you may not want to, it's fine, but just let's, you know, we don't have to try to fix it.
all I'm trying to do is understand. I'm not talking about the elevator at the moment. I'm talking about the appearance of that portion of the pavilion, and I'm trying to understand to see if there's anything else that can be adjusted. I understand you don't have time.
Yeah, Gwen, I'd love to be able, it's going on to 9 and I see a lot of other hands up and there might be other issues. And so if we can go back to that and we could even work with you independently on that, I really appreciate your interest and your patience and, in wanting to hear more about what community members think about that. So thank you. And we will follow up and maybe even tonight if we have time. So if I can just go to Wari Price, if I can ask her, because I think she was on earlier, and I know, Wari, you were very kind in coming to the Parks Committee and speaking up about the walls. No one knows the battery better than the person who basically created it. So I don't know, Wari, if you feel comfortable and you'd like to say anything about the battery entry area or, any advice or recommendations as this is going towards its final iteration in front of the PDC. We would welcome your voice on that. Are you there, Wari?
She might be unmuted. I don't know.
You hear me? There. Okay.
Yes.
Alice, can you see me? And you can hear me, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The plus for me right now is they listened. We don't have the stacked wall. It is an interpretation, but I agree with the comment that it's conceptual. I do think, and I'm in conversation with the Parks Department on trying to integrate it more into the textural quality of the Stony Creek granite. Why that wall works so well, it's very natural looking because of its rough edges, and also it's work that no skateboarders can go on it. So, and it doesn't take any graffiti. So it had a lot. We were working a lot with how we retain its beauty and the intent of the stone. What I have said to the authority when I've seen it, and also what Parks has reached out to me, is I think there is something that could be delineated in a bas relief sense of the wall to be more interpretive, so it's not so flat and it's just not carved into. I mean, these are elements that say Manhattan, because it's bas relief. It's a rough finish. It's got some gravitas to say I'm land and that's water. So these are, again, I understand the constraints that are given just because of it's over the tunnel. And, and the width of the entrance is to greet the inside of the park more to the visiting public, even though you've got those stanchions which will support the barriers when flooding is forecasted. The aspect that it's still very flat, and I think they heard that from me. They're hearing it from I think the Parks Department has indicated to me they are back and forth trying to figure it out.
Tell me if you want it on your salad or not.
I do think that we definitely want to see the Stony Creek granite.
Lettuce is important. Meg is.
Am I speaking or not? What's happening?
Yes, somebody was unmuted. I'm sorry. We had a little bit of a glitch there.
So I think we've said that the Stony Creek granite or the park should flow into and not be a big break. That now you're in Battery Park City, because the public does not know the difference. It's a park. It's a continuous waterfront enhancement. So I think whatever is done to talk about bringing the Stony Creek granite, that it should flow into the Battery Park City and into Imperial Plaza in a much more seamless or more organic, interesting way. And it can't be so flat. And it's certainly, we don't want polish. So, I mean, those kind of refinements are being talked about. I think wherever the wall goes up against the berm, I don't know if it is a problem horticulturally for a surface plant to be there. So I think I certainly know there'll be no trees, but the 15 feet that's needed is a big space of not having any vertical plants. So it is what it is, but I do think it's much better than the stacked kind of monolithic look of the previous thing. So they listened, and I think they have to be applauded for listening and trying to be interpretive. It's you don't have to be didactic, you don't have to show a map, but I do think there are ways to let people know they're at the birthplace of New York. But anyway, it's an improvement is what I'm saying by the abstract sense, but I still wish it could have more of a relief and different textures onto the wall itself.
Wari, thank you so much. I think those are important points for this the 5% design consideration going forward. I don't know if that's something that you all can further consider, but those are great points. I've got Jeff Galloway next.
Hi, thanks. Most of my questions have been answered, but I just have a couple of details to fill in. The design flood elevation, did you say that was 18 feet, or was it some other?
It actually varies depending on where you are, based on how close to the waterfront you are, what's in between you and the water itself. So areas.
So at the wall location that we've been talking about.
Yeah, so the areas, for instance, in Imperial Plaza and across the tunnel, the design flood elevation is at about 18 feet.
Okay, and the top of the wall that you're showing there, what elevation is that? Is that 18, or is it some margin of safety above that?
I believe that's at 18 feet. Hogan, is that the top of the wall matches the DFE, or is there a slight build on top of that?
The top of the wall does match the DFE. There's the thickness of the veneer that will be added to the top of that, but that's marginal compared to I think what you're asking about. Yeah.
And in some of your drawings, there was a indication of a 2-foot, I don't know, margin at the top. I didn't understand the significance of that 2 feet. Why was that noted on those renderings?
I'm not sure which one specifically you're asking about.
Yeah, keep going back.
Oh, this here. That's just to indicate the location of the signage in relation to the top of the wall.
I see. Okay. And did I understand you to say, so State Street doesn't need a wall because it is at 18 feet already elevation, or is the DFE lower than that at State Street?
The DFE, by the time you get up towards State Street, it actually drops to about 15 feet. So we hit natural grade right where the entrance to the park is. Unfortunately, then this deck wasn't one that was specifically discussing the battery, but when you get to the corner of State Street and Battery Place, there is a landscape island, and then there's paving that wraps around either side of it. So we're tying it to grade in and around that landscape island.
Okay, and at some point in the presentation, the entrance that, at least on this slide, if you look on the right-hand side where the bike path runs through, there was mention that that had been reduced from 45 to 30 feet. What was the reason for the reduction?
The reason, based on feedback we received last time, I think there was concern that the width of the opening felt too much like a plaza, and that it should feel a little more intimate. And so we looked at reducing that width down to essentially what we needed in order to maintain the clear bike lane, and also there is a truck access route through there, and then making sure that felt comfortable still from a pedestrian point of view, and that the proportions also in terms of the clear opening to the height also felt comfortable.
Okay. The only other point I'd make is I'd just throw in my support for an additional elevator at at the Pavilion building near the service entrance. When the slide showing the pros and the cons, it looked to me that the cons were relatively minor compared to the pros. And I agree with Wendy's concern that if I'm pushing a friend or relative in a wheelchair, which I from time to time do, that long ramp might be something of a workout that I might want to avoid. And although I think it might actually hurt the aesthetics at an aesthetically challenged location already, I think it certainly would help the functionality. That's all.
Thanks, Jeff. I see Tammy, our chair. Is that you?
Yeah, that's me. Thank you. I know there's a lot of questions, so I'm not going to rehash anything that's been said. I appreciate all of it. Gwen, you mentioned that the primary project partner for the battery, it does not seem to me that that was Wari. Is your reference to the Parks Department there?
Our partners, our agency partners that own property include EDC and DPR. So the Parks Department, certainly we have been also in close coordination, collaboration with the Battery Conservancy. And it's my belief and my understanding that with the adjustments that we've made and in recognition of the feedback and the refinement of the design, that all of those entities are supportive of the design that we've come up with.
Okay, thanks. Nick, you asked about the places where we didn't meet. I think you're hearing some of the places again with the bike path integration solutions, the elevator, the streetscape. There, the lack of vertical greenery, which alludes to the conversations that we had initially for Nick and Gwen of the community's reaction to the first plans for the battery and the loss of trees and the conversations we had there. So I do agree. I think that we need to put pen to paper, and I'm going to try and work with Diana and Alice to do that afterwards. So thank you. The battery treatments you said were based on the designs that were shown. In the beginning, the community had asked for other options that were not such large berms. And we didn't see that. We were told the berms are necessary. And I'm wondering how, with the elevation of the wharf, how relevant and necessary are the plans for the heights that you have, considering that the wharf will now be raised all the way around the park? You know, I understand Pier A is still a low point and nothing's going there, but for the rest of the park, it's really being addressed. So initially there was no addressing of the park, and this was the solution. Can you tell me whether this is at all redundant?
So
is there anyone from the engineering group on the call tonight? I think what you're essentially asking is whether or not the addition of the Battery Wharf project has impacted the design flood elevation for our project at the battery at the north end. Is that right, Tammy?
Yes.
It's certainly not redundant, because the Battery Wharf project is designed to address sea level rise, whereas our project is the design flood elevation for the 2050s 100-year storm. But I think that we should answer the question as to whether or not there's been any impact on the design flood elevation that results from the Battery Wharf project. And I don't know if we have anybody from our engineering team on the call tonight.
Yeah, Gwen, Antoine is on. Antoine Abiturgan from
okay.
Yep. So the Battery Wharf project is only addressing the low level inundation, which really means like the sunny day inundation that could happen with sea level rise. The it does not really have a major impact on the design flood elevation for a major storm surge event. And it's quite a bit inland. Our flood wall is quite a bit inland from the edge there, that actually the impact would be minimal by the time you get to the flood wall where we're building it. So it's really has a minimal impact at this stage on what we're doing.
So the rise, they were talking about a 9 to 11 foot rise, I believe, at the wharf going around, and that has minimal impact on this.
Because the storm surge is actually quite a bit higher than that. Where the design flood elevation for us at the low point there is 15 feet. So it's well above the 11-foot elevation. And that's really...
Antoine, I think I understand, Tammy's point, because we talk about how what's happening at the water's edge can absorb some of the impact of the surge at times and lower the ultimate design flood elevation the further back you get from the water's edge.
Thank you, Gwen.
So
yes.
I think that what the question is, because the Battery Wharf project wasn't in mind when we started this project, and we were measuring what the design flood elevation, the fact that the edge, the Battery Wharf project is going to be raising that edge, does that change the way that the water's edge absorbs the impact of the storm surge, and could it have some impact of lowering the DFE for our project?
Correct.
Gwen, I understood the question. What I was trying to say is that there's quite a bit of a large piece of land before you get to where the flood alignment is over that battery, over the wharf, and which already served into cushioning that flood elevation in a way. So the addition of the elevation right at the water edge is not going to have a huge impact. I mean, we of course, just like you said, it was not part of the design when we did the coastal modeling. It could certainly be reevaluated, but just because we're not right behind it, it's not like so close to it that we already took advantage of that piece of land to soften the storm surge, and they're really almost like a still water elevation that we're really talking about, that it's quite a bit inland of the edge.
I get your response, but let's be precise in how we're responding. When you say it's not a huge difference, I'd like to, what do you mean that there is no difference, or there's no measurable difference? Let's be precise in our language instead of not a huge difference.
The expectation is that there would be very little difference, but like I said, we did not study it. We didn't model that elevation at the water's edge.
So you
and
can,
in fact, yeah, go ahead, Danny.
So Antoine, Gwen sees where I'm going very clearly. There's an issue of use of public funds. That is a question for me and needs to be answered, because I would like to understand what you're saying is not a major difference. What kind of modeling has or has not been done or should have been done to account for that? With the city spending millions and millions of dollars, and now with the Battery Wharf project that we've gotten presentations on, if one doesn't affect the other, then why am I doing it? Why are we supporting a project if what you're doing makes the other one duplicative? Then why, other than repair, why are we spending public dollars to go down this road? It does not seem feasible to me that there'd be no impact on the project you have if we're spending millions on the other end. Something has to benefit from the work that's being done on both sides, no?
The space between the edge of the water and our flood alignment is the benefit. That's the space that's being protected on a daily basis in future years with sea level rise. The Battery Wharf is protecting the space really from the edge of the water back to our alignment. It will not protect that space in a storm surge event. So that's the benefit of the Battery Wharf project. Without it, the area, the water side from our flood alignment to the edge of the water could potentially be flooded on a daily basis, if you want to call it that, with sea level rise, depending on how much sea level rises. Does that give a better explanation, maybe? So there is a benefit because on a daily basis, you'll be able to access that area in the future,
I'd
but
like
not
to
in a
see
storm surge.
I'd like to see some metrics, if you don't mind.
Yeah. Sure,
on that.
we'll work on that and
Antoine,
address that in the future. Yep.
Antoine, can we perhaps can you put your heads together and maybe come up with an answer to the question that's a little more precise in terms of of any potential change that the addition of the Battery Wharf project might have on the DFE for our project at the north end of the Battery?
Sure. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I have one more question for Gwen. I'm so sorry.
No, please.
So when we're looking, I know this has not been determined and there's lots of dialogue yet. I'm a little confused as to how there isn't any need for parkland alienation when we're talking about those head houses or the pump houses that you're looking to place either on the bike path, Pataki Way, which is now designated a heritage trail, or, although we've said loud and clear, we definitely don't want that to take away any of the space in Tire Swing or West Thames Park. How do the placements of those items that are extraordinarily not related to park usage not need parkland alienation?
It's my understanding that the locations that we've been looking at are not parkland, that they are DOT right of way. Am I wrong about that, Jenny?
That's correct.
Or Antoine? Okay.
So we were told you were looking at the grassland area in West Thames Park. That is not DOT area.
The what?
The grass in West Thames.
We're not looking at the grass in West Thames.
And the area that's been designated Heritage Trail is marked as parkland, which is just west of the bike path. And you're saying that that is DOT controlled?
It's my understanding that the area which is on the far western end of next to the street, next to Little West Street, is DOT property. Antoine, is that your understanding as well?
That is correct. It's DOT's right of way. At least that's what the searches have kind of shown.
Because I saw a map and it was mapped parkland, which is why I asked. All right, no problem.
Well, we'll check. We'll check on it. We'll check to make sure that we're correct. We'll make a note of that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay.
Those are my questions. Thanks, Alice.
Thanks, Tammy. Great questions. So I think, is it Tom Burton? I see a hand up here. Tom, are you there? I think
my hand's up. But
I
there
have
is a
Tom.
Tom. You're right. There's a Tom.
Yeah, I
up
want to
top
have Tom
front.
present.
Yeah, that's me. Hey.
Great.
Thanks. I support and I support a lot of what Tammy just reiterated regarding begging for these treatments that would integrate the two projects and try to find a way to do that and respect Warry's input. Because it appeals to me that wall would serve very well, and I had a sort of a little idea of that you respecting the map that you have there, that the places where there is land and shoreline, you have an outcropping which has a planter in it, and would just break up that wall even just a little bit might really be pleasing, and things of that nature. Just sort of run with the idea you've already presented, and then the next question I had was just in a plan view where you see that's showing right now You see Pier A, and then you see the little cut between Wagner Park, and there's a little like a sort of an oblong shaped chevron and some green down at the water's edge. I don't know if you've spoken about that or if I just missed it. Is that a put in for boats or something? What is that?
No, so this was I think presented at an earlier meeting. Currently along the inlet there, if you kind of flash back, there's some riprap, which is where that line of green is actually located with trees. And then where I think you're calling out the little L-shaped projection. Yeah. Currently, that's actually part of our relieving platform at the edge of Wagner Park. What we're looking to do in that area is actually create a naturalized edge where we're introducing a series of tiered habitat planters that cascade down into the water line. And we can look at this sort of estuary habitat that will start to establish itself through that zone. That little section of the relieving platform is going to be partially removed. We're pulling back some of the structural slab, opening up more daylight to go in underneath what is currently fully blocked from natural light. So we can also sort of encourage different kinds of habitat that would be developing underneath that. Introducing some terraced areas into that area that was the relieving platform, utilizing some of that existing structure, and then also introducing a little observation deck, metal graded observation deck, which will also go out over that area so you can see what's actually going on in terms of the new estuary habitat.
Thank you. That sounds lovely. There's quite a wash in there and a lot of activity, and I was wondering if you've explored any the idea of electric generation, based on tidal motions and for the park and some of the sustainability. I'd explored that when I was looking at ideas of presenting for the Eco Pier on Pier 26 years and years ago.
We've definitely discussed it as part of renewable energy opportunities site-wide. And as Nikita mentioned earlier in the presentation, the building has the capacity to integrate up to 300 kilowatts of additional renewable energy that could be on the site, in the water, on the building. And that's something that we will definitely be looking at in closer detail further down the track.
Thanks very much, Jennifer and Tom.
Thanks.
I think
one, excuse me, if I could just one last thing.
Sure.
Is there's a dearth of docking locations, and I wondered if you had considered step downs to and some wharfage, meaning wharfage for boats with some mooring apparatus, both for for safety and emergency response type of vessel, escape from New York scenarios, but also for commercial or visiting boat vessel activity, since we have so little in New York Harbor, and most tall ship parades now just avoid New York Harbor because there's so little dockage.
Not in Pier Plaza, so Pier Inlet, no.
Not especially the inlet, but just along this area that you're going to be renewing and reworking.
There was some suggestion of that early on, back when we did the assessment number of years ago. It was not met well by a lot of folks, and so that's not something that we have pursued.
Okay.
Tom, you may have missed those early on meetings, but I would tell you that the Battery Park City Authority almost got lynched by the community for docks around Wagner. Just saying.
Okay. Well, I as a constituency of a very small group of people, I'm sad about that.
Okay, I'm going to ask for a member of the public who has been incredibly patient, and then we can go back to other committee members who have second questions. Todd Fine, if you're still here. Sorry for the wait. Diane, is Todd still around? Oh, yes, you're there. I think you're, if you can unmute him. No, not yet. Well, while we wait for Todd, I'm just going to ask, I just had a couple of questions. Can you just confirm the date of the PDC presentation?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, okay, Todd, go. Sorry, thank you.
Yes. Hi, I'm the president of the Washington Street Advocacy Group, which advocates for historic preservation in the Lower West Side of Manhattan. Washington Street Advocacy Group objects to the new geological storytelling element of the wall, which we believe is inappropriate for the engineering firm to define. It is essentially art washing and greenwashing considering the context. Having only been introduced to this element today, CB1 should oppose preliminary approval of the art component in any resolution or letter for the Public Design Commission, as it contradicts the traditional role of the community board to advise beforehand when it comes to public art. It also threatens to usurp the public role as well as the voice of artists in a contributory artwork selection process within a more open procedure like the Percent for Art framework. And this is especially relevant since the wall will be on city land, not only state land. Given the size of this expenditure, there should be a public role in the art/storytelling selection process, and a certain percentage of funds should be set aside. In any case, the art elements need longer consideration to achieve a better outcome, as Ms. Worry-Price affirmed, and does not need urgent approval. I would make the case that the proposal is a combination of greenwashing and art washing, which is not responsive to the disrupted nature of the wall and its forced construction due to climate change. This wall, which disfigures the oldest colonial part of the city and certainly a key location for the Lenape, could connect to an artistic consideration of the Native American dispossession, as Mayor Bill de Blasio had promised out of the Monument Commission. It is forced by climate change, which is caused by no small degree through the urban megacity, which New York inaugurated for the world and which presented a shock to the geological time frame the artwork asserts to refer to in the variety of stone. The wall does not acknowledge this. The Hudson River Valley as a whole is a victim of climate change, and referring to it innocently on this flood wall does not make an appropriate artistic statement. There may be interesting elements to these ideas, but they should not be a corporation like ACOMS to determine, but should come from a process that involves artists, community bodies, historians, and Native American representatives. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Todd. It's a very fair and interesting point. Given the scale of the wall, it is quite an object. Okay, so I think I'm not seeing any other hands up unless, Betty, you are asking another question?
Yes.
Sure.
Well, actually, I wanted to make a comment. There was so much concern about pushing relatives up those ramps. As someone who spent, I want to thank, first of all, the team for going to the mayor's office for people with disabilities and getting their approval, because now you have the people who have the expertise and represent the population. It's not just me. And it doesn't surprise me that they came to the same conclusions that I did, that I live it. But I spent 4 decades as a physical therapist before I lost the use of my legs. I have pushed more people than you probably want to count up ramps and doing other things. And those ramps are very gentle. I think the people who are concerned about their abilities are way underestimating their abilities, because I, in my scooter, where the motor is 4 inches by 2 inches by 1 inch, could push somebody up, an adult in a wheelchair, up that kind of incline, because it really is that nothing. That's kind of the reality.
Thanks, Betty. That is a great personal perspective, and I appreciate that there were others. Thank you. I think I just had a couple of questions, if I could ask. So if you could for just a couple of specific questions, and I want to get back quickly to Bob's passive house question. But could you just confirm the date of the PDC presentation, and will this submission be precisely what we have received tonight? Is there something that we didn't see, or you're giving the same presentation to PDC?
Jenny?
So the PDC presentation itself would likely be till June. So we're putting in an interim update at the end of this month, which will address the items that were in the certificate that we received with the preliminary approval. In that, we will include materials that we presented to you last time. That included the physical site security, wayfinding strategies, and we are looking to include the development of the flood wall. that was presented. Now we presented two concepts, and as had mentioned, we're in the process of developing one in collaboration with Parks and the Battery Conservancy. That's the intent, is that goes in on April 30th. We would follow up, but there's an opportunity for PDC to give us feedback. We would follow up then with any revisions, and then also find the final submission for the May submission date, which I don't have off the top of my head. I think it's May 26th or sometime around then. And then there would be the meeting presentation in June.
Okay, I actually didn't follow that, so I'm going to just ask that Nick, if you would be good enough to just write an email to the board, that kind of defines what all that is. But just to confirm that the images are the same in their presentation as we have received tonight, except for the additional flood wall. Is that correct?
The only materials that will go into the PDC submission will relate to the flood wall, and what you saw were still in progress. It was two concepts to give you an indication of the direction.
Yeah, I understand. So could you can you share with us prior to presenting to PDC what the final concepts will be, so that the board could look at those? Is that possible?
Sure.
That's great.
Yeah, can send that to you.
So with the exposed flood wall, if you could just go back to the three-dimensional perspective of one of those that shows the actual flood wall. I'm just curious, do you have any views looking north from the back of the wall? I guess that's the back of the wall, although the front, if you're in the park. Are there anything going in the other direction? Do you have any views that show the wall, not from the north looking south, but the south looking north?
No, we don't.
No, we don't today.
Seems like an odd thing not to include, because of course that's a pretty critical view as well. But it also I can't quite understand the wall. It looks like it's thinner. In this angle that we have here, it looks like it's thinner at the top, thicker at the bottom. How thick is it? It looks very thick further down. I didn't see sections or anything that indicates the sort of thickness of it, sectional.
Alice, you're correct. The back of the wall is battered. It's narrower at its top. It tapers to the top. At the base, it's about 5 to 5.5 feet wide.
Mm-hmm.
That dimension is just defined by the structural beam and the footing that's necessary to elevate over the underpass. At the top, it narrows down to roughly 2.5 feet wide.
I think it's something everyone should see. I mean, it's it's a 90 feet wall. I mean, this is the size of like a New York City loft. I mean, this is quite a huge piece of construction. I think we should see all sides and all aspects, but it just struck me when I saw that momentary side here, that it almost looked like a seat of some sort. And I'm just wondering, was there any thought about, ways to incorporate seating or something else to make that wall be more than just a wall, as it were, like people are calling for art and such? Was there anything that was addressed on that backside that could have been useful in that regard, whether it's seating or some sort of, sense of where that width comes out, that could have any kind of some of this planting that people are calling for, or any other use? It just is given its shape.
We have had a lot of discussions with our project partners about the potential functions of this wall, and there's concern, I know, from parks about people scaling this wall, and so overall, keeping in mind the definite design goal to add dimensionality and texture to this in order to incorporate it into the setting, there is still a desire to limit opportunities for people to climb on the wall. And so in terms of the batter in the back, that is just to limit the physical size of this as much as we possibly can. Well, basically to limit the size of it as much as we can. But we've been discouraged to explore ways for people to climb this wall.
Yeah, I mean, it's the old story of a defensive architectural design. I mean, and much like the argument that the elevators are costly and their maintenance is high, and you don't want to hire someone to watch over them. I mean, what's the cost here? But anyway, understand the response. The other question is, could you just show a shot of the columns again? I wasn't quite sure. We have 4 of these columns. The scale here was a little hard for me to appreciate. And in the close-up here, there are no dimensions noted, but it looks like the woman is either 10 feet tall. I just don't get it as versus the smaller. Do you see what I mean? Your small version on the left, the scale of the man standing next to a column is very different than this woman here. You know, it just doesn't look. What is the scale of the column, I guess, is the question. And how?
That's a good question. The columns are all they're about 7.5 feet tall.
They're 7.5 feet tall.
Yeah, so the woman she's not 10 feet tall. She'd actually be, roughly 5'10", 5'8".
Well, you understand my point is if you go to the left, he's like half the size of it. So there's something didn't jive. But and then the width of these, they seem to be different shapes, all of them, right? They're all in order to.
They are different shapes. The widths vary. As we kind of go across, I'm going to switch to the plan because it's easier to explain this looking at the plan. So as you can see here, the shape of the columns needs to create the negative space in between the direction of the gates. So we have worked to clad these in a way to make them kind of reflect the dynamic nature of the footprint of the columns. But the shape of the columns varies basically as you move across the plaza.
It's really hard to know what's going on there, both in terms of the plan, the section, elevation, without dimensions, without perspectives on all 3. But anyway, it seems like it's a fait accompli. But another question is, and then there's an additional wall to it going into Wagner Park, right? In that sort of right there. That's another, right? Like a 12-foot. 9-foot high, 12-foot long wall or something, or
no? It'll be also 7.5 feet tall, slightly maybe 8 feet tall, and it extends into the wall into the park here. Actually, as it extends to the north, this is where we have the planted slope sloping up against it, so it quickly disappears into Wagner Park. But roughly, it's about. From the smallest point here to where it's exposed, I'd say it's about 20 feet maximum.
Not nothing. Okay, I just wanted to make sure we understood it all. And
there is
then
actually,
I guess
there is a rendering of that in this deck as well.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, if you want to go to that quickly.
And then, are you willing to leave the full deck for the community to be able to absorb? Do we have a copy of this, Diana?
Oh, is that?
Yes, we do.
Yes, yes, you have it, and it should be posted on our website tonight.
So if you could give us more of the flood wall and the back of the flood wall and the section of the flood wall and the columns in this section. If this is 95% done, one would assume you have all the architectural construction documents pretty close to done. There must be all of that available. It'd be great if you could allow the public to be able to see that.
Okay. Alice, would you prefer that we integrate that then into one PDF and then issue that to you in one go?
That sounds well.
Okay.
Oh, I'm just getting a question here on my email. Someone wants to know, Lori asked if you can reverse the wall so the batter faces the street. It's an interesting question.
Yeah, we did have an option at one stage that did that, and as Hogan mentioned, I think there was some discussions with our partners in regards to the scaling of that wall, and the preference was to deter scaling along that length.
So that's where you made a decision.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, I guess as one of your partners, some folks would like to see that, I guess, further thought about. But okay, so I think, although my questions are answered, I think we had the question of the going back to the sustainability of the building. Bob had asked about Passive House. So Bob, I don't know if you want to elaborate on that, but if somebody could speak as to whether Passive House was looked at, that was your question, right, Bob?
I just want to mention a couple of things about budget, just really quickly. One is that Pier A has been a restaurant for a while, and at the beginning, years ago, the first controversy about Wagner Park had to do with building a restaurant there in the first place, and the community board rejected it, and here we are ending up with a restaurant, but we're ending up with a restaurant sponsored by the Battery Park City Authority. At the same time, the Pier A wasn't able to be financially viable. And so here we are creating a new restaurant up on top of an expensive hill. How do we know that that one's going to be viable? The other thing I wanted to say, I just wanted to, these are just two things to add, and then I just want to do the passive house thing. The other thing I wanted to comment on real quick is like Tammy said, the wharf really has a big effect on how the storm surge kind of works out. Likewise, if we manage to get the HATS project working and we had a regional solution that may or may not consider harbor barriers, then a lot of these different kinds of approaches become moot. So we have lots of entities wanting to spend lots of money along the perimeter of this part of Manhattan, but really it's part of a larger gauge kind of consideration, and we don't do that large gauge consideration, and we don't throw the money behind it either, or put the fight behind getting those things done. So that I rest my case on the Pier A and Wagner restaurant and wharf work. Just really quickly in terms of passive house, Community Board 1 has supported passive house for half a decade, and Community Board 1 went forward and was part of a borough board resolution that for all of Brooklyn, and also a borough board resolution for all the community boards of Manhattan. Those were done also 5 years ago. So Community Board 1 is really behind that. Some really big issues are, if you really want to move ecological construction forward, it's very important that that become code in the state of New York. And so Passive House is working very closely with ASHRAE, with HERS, and with LEED to come up with ways to approach code making in the state of New York that's easy for the code keepers to kind of like work on site. So those things are, programs are being developed that kind of make that possible. The next thing is that Passive House plus LEED more than equals wherever the carbon zero standard is. So if you take all of the things that LEED does and you add in the middle of that the passive house package to kind of be their energy saving solution, then you get a package not only that's much bigger than zero carbon, but also is already accepted around the world and around the country. So the next thing that really is important that just came up that should be mentioned is that in working on the budget for the state of New York, REBNY tried to put in an element into the executive budget of the governor that made it possible for big real estate owners to invest their money however they wanted without any controls, and they wouldn't have to improve their buildings. And that was something that Passive House was very involved with, resisting along with lots of other construction elements in the city, including the unions. But that's really important that something like Carbon Zero kind of work on these bigger issues, because improving this one construction project is important, but making sure that we have codes in the state of New York and in the city of New York that are the building codes that make the renovation and retrofitting of old and new construction all of a much higher level. That's what's really important to work on. And so thank everyone for being patient with me, but I have really thought about energy conservation for a long time. I've really been in the fight for this stuff for quite a while. I think it's really important to work together in larger groups and really have the technical knowledge to affect code in a place like New York. Because if we don't get those codes, then neither the New York State Energy Conservation Code nor the New York City Energy Conservation Code, neither of those have any aspect that supports local law 97. So without the code support, local law 97 really can't go anywhere. So it's really important to make sure those things are one piece. Thank you.
Okay, Bob, thank you. Good, powerful ending on almost Earth Day. So that's, I thank you. And I thank, for the committee, I guess on behalf of the committee, want to thank the Battery Park City Authority team. Long, long night as usual. Thankfully, nothing else on the agenda. Really appreciate the time and patience in trying to sift through all this rather impactful stuff. And again, and I guess this is one of the last times we'll see it, but we look forward to the follow-up on the number of the items that we'll follow up with in an email to you all. And I think that unless anyone else has anything else, I'm going to call it a night, if that's okay. And thank you all very, very
I did
much.
just want to note, Bob, if
Yeah.
you would like for us to respond to your passive house comments, I'm happy to do that now. I don't want to hold up the the group if we need.
Well, I think if you do that in writing and send it to Alice, I'd appreciate that just as much. I don't want to. I get really revved up for this because I get hit in the face, and when I get hit in the face with these things, I get into the combat, and I don't want to do that.
Well,
I think it is important, and so send it to Alice and send any answers to Alice, and I'm glad to be involved with the conversation. And if Alice thinks that that conversation should engage everyone's time, I'm glad to do it.
Well, why don't we take the last minute and just have your response on the passive house, because it seems like it's a perfectly good opportunity. So go ahead. Let's
Sure.
just
I mean,
finish that.
I want to start just by saying we completely respect the history of activism and action that Passive House has engaged in, especially as it relates to New York State and New York City energy conservation codes. It's really critical to moving our cities and our buildings forward. And I think it's notable that Passive House is well on its way to impacting our codes. We're seeing impacts already for the 2020 New York City Environmental Conservation Code, addressing things like psi values and thermal bridging. So I think those are great points to be made. I think in this case, it comes down to what informed the choice to pursue a singular sustainability certification that really made sense for the project program specifically, and also aligned with BPCA's specific forward-looking goals for the entire district. And so, alignment with the BPCA sustainability plan is really emphasizing a full picture of carbon specifically, which I think is more holistic than a lot of folks may believe it really is. And it's also part of working toward a zero carbon community. So when you're talking about thinking about the future, I think this really has an impact on long-term investment in infrastructure. It's a key part of ILFI's mission. They're dedicated to none of their projects using combustion on site and adding additionality and redundancy to the grid through renewables. And I think that's a really, really valuable part of pursuing the certification that we would not receive from pursuing something like Passive House or LEED or another building certification. We are very familiar with Passive House and think it has great ideals, but it just isn't always a perfect fit for every project, fundamentally when it comes to the program of a building. I think its core principles really fundamentally align better with a residential or a commercial building where people may spend a really significant time indoors. I think the same programmatic impacts are felt by projects that pursue LEED, projects that are pretty small in scale or don't align with an office typology, for example, just don't do well with LEED because it's catered to address goals to a certain level across the board that not all projects can really address. And there are just different parameters, I think, that apply to this building when it comes to operating a restaurant, operating a community space where people are moving in and out a lot throughout the day. That really affects systems and ventilation in a way that Passive House may not fully capture or in some ways penalize the building. As for local law 97, I would say addressing carbon absolutely aligns with where local law 97 and the Climate Mobilization Act is trying to push New York City's buildings. And this certification goes, much further than what the carbon emissions laws are requiring of buildings anywhere in the next 25 plus years. We are not only addressing operational carbon, but also addressing embodied carbon, which Passive House leaves out. And while the project isn't pursuing Passive House, I think it's certainly doing a lot in the spirit of those principles. Since we have to consider embodied carbon through the certification, I think we've had to consider this balance between investing really high carbon materials, like I mentioned, with insulation. There can be really negative impacts sometimes with a lot of insulation products when it comes to global warming potential. But investing in those to reduce energy use versus lowering the carbon emissions of the building materials now and investing in long-term all-electric infrastructure and renewables and things like that. So I think that's a really important point here where we are benefiting. I also want to say the building envelope has been updated, and Gabe touched on that earlier, to include things like continuous insulation throughout the building envelope, triple pane glazing. The team has worked really hard to mitigate and remove thermal bridging, and I think all of those are really core and at the heart of what Passive House is trying to promote. I think that's really had a positive impact on our building envelope, and I think that's a great consequence. And so we feel really confident that this project is prioritizing envelope performance and Passive House related strategies in a way that's meaningful, but also balances the other sustainability goals of the project and just the program drivers that are just fundamentally different for a project like this than would be considered for a larger building, an office building, a residential building, just fundamentally different energy uses.
Could I take that on?
Sure.
The first thing is that Passive House is now moving into carbon neutral kind of ideas, and it had part of the mix is carbon neutral now, and where the energy comes from is part of the basic package that's moving forward. Also, there's an alliance between a growing alliance between LEED and Passive House, between ASHRAE and Passive House, and between HERS and Passive House to come up with codes that work for everybody. The next thing is that there are over 100,000 Passive House buildings of every type in the world, and it's a global kind of design. And so, for example, just in New York, we have going the largest Passive House project in the world, which is 666 units of affordable housing at on 111th Street between Park and Madison. So there's lots of projects going on that are major in scale, that are completed already. Anything where there's a new adapter, that's a new program, and we're happy to work with them. And I would like to engage every program that's out there with changing the codes. But, to ignore the invested work that's in place with this stuff and just say, oh, we have some nice new ideas. And I say, oh, that's very nice. But lots of people who are 15 times or 100 times more brilliant than I am are adding these things up inside the context of Passive House, inside the context of LEED, inside the context of the next revision of ASHRAE. So all these things are really on the move. I don't know that we need any new ones, but they're all welcome.
Okay, I think that's a good place to end. Thank you very much. That's something that could go on for a long time and should. I think the one thing to remember is that this project, all eyes will be on it, both the building and the landscape and the engineering. It is, going to be a real trailblazer, and I'm sure everyone is really invested in getting it right. I hope that the community's responses and the continued response will continue to be helpful. And that the dialogue continues, particularly on sustainability. Sorry, somebody's asking me something. I'm hearing my name.
Sorry, Alice. It's Nick Spordone. I just had a couple of quick things, if I might, and thank you for the
sure.
for the time. Just for the record, I know before we close, and Bob, thank you. We go back a long way and have been over some solid ground together. But I am going to have to insist that our choosing to go a different way from Passive House is not us ignoring it. It's just that there were different ways to do certain things. Each project presents its own opportunities, and us not doing Passive House is not ignoring what you said. We've taken an honest and thoughtful look at it, but we've decided to go a different way based on the realities and the needs of the project. The second question was about the restaurant in Wagner Park, and I saw Gwen was trying to weigh in too, but I would remind the folks and the public that we're not just building a restaurant there because we want to build a restaurant. We're replacing the restaurant that is now in the current Wagner Pavilion, and that is as a result of the many fruitful and productive conversations we've had with the community board over the course of this project, when we asked if they wanted an eatery or a presence in the park, and the answer was yes, we want a restaurant. So that's why that's there. It's not that we're building a new one, we're replacing the one that's there now. And the last issue about the HAT study, agreed. We would love to be able to see that study done, but the study hasn't even been concluded. It's unclear as to when it will be concluded. And then we are looking at a minimum, many years after that until the project can be kind of scoped, designed, and then kind of built and realized. And the Battery Park City Authority is not prepared to wait. We need to act, and we need to act with full due diligence and energy. And the partnership we have with the community board has been great to that end. But next October will be 10 years since Hurricane Sandy. And we need to move on that. We can't wait for an indefinite time in the future when the HAT study may be completed, and then many years after that until we may realize the protection afforded by it. So with that, Gwen, unless you want to add anything else, Diana, I know you and I will connect, but I have a couple of things here that I know I wanted to follow up on, the DXB calculation and the metrics as next steps. We're going to have a continued conversation about the service entrance doors, the aesthetic and the materiality, among other things. So we welcome that conversation, Tammy, with you and with Alice.
Nick, we want
to see if we can find a
we need
a
cost
place
and
that makes sense.
financing, and we
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
also, yeah, well, also the cost and financing conversation. Also, one thing that nobody's heard about is you said you'll start in 2020.
Alice, we don't need
project?
we don't need a financing conversation. We just would like to see the information.
Well, that's
We've
what
asked.
I mean. So I
Yeah.
just want to,
Yeah,
I just
yeah,
want to
yeah.
say, can I just ask the other thing is, nobody's mentioned just how long will the park be closed during this? If it starts next year, you say, how long does the public expect not to be utilizing this area? Is
It's
this
a good question. Gwen, you want to, Gwen or Jenny?
we never discussed that.
Jenny, what is Lero projecting on that? I know that we're projecting about a 2-year construction for the project. What about is that the closure for the park? Is it?
It depends on which one you're referring to. So at the moment we're Wagner Park and the museum, we're looking at a roughly 2-year construction period for that. With the Battery and Imperial Plaza, also roughly 2-year construction period. However, we need to have more detailed conversations with our partners just in regards to the adjacent resiliency projects that are also under construction. They need to be coordinated with those, and whether or not we will need to do phasing also of areas in Imperial Plaza and the Battery.
So if all went well, demolition would begin next, I guess, the spring next year. Is that what we're in the is that your time frame? In the spring of next year, we'd start demolition and be closed for 2 years from then.
Or earlier, yeah.
Yeah.
Are you talking Q1 or Q2 of 2022?
Q1 of 2022.
And are you, I mean, we'll get into that, but the conversations that were had when the wharf project was discussed with Battery Park City Authority present was that the Battery Conservancy and the Battery would not be fully closed during the work that you're doing along. You'd obviously have to close off the construction areas, but there would be access to the waterfront around Pier A.
That's a level of detail that hasn't been fully fleshed out yet.
That's something the public should know.
Kind of want to get that going pretty soon too. Yeah, I think we need to.
Yes, no, agreed. It definitely needs to be discussed.
Yeah. All right. I think we can close it out here before we all, 9:36. So Okay, well, thank you again. Happy Earth Day, and we will look forward to hearing from you again, and we will be providing information for you. Thanks. Good night, all.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much.
Good night.
We'll talk to you soon. Thanks, Tammy. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay.
Hey,
Bye-bye.
Alice, stay
Yeah.
on for a sec if you can, and Diana. Thanks,
Uh,
everybody.
Okay, but I think
Thanks.
there's a lot of people
Bye-bye.
on still, so. I think-
Diana can stop the recording and then
Okay.
Can
move
I
people.
listen?